It's 7 o'clock and we have a quorum here, so I'm going to call this meeting to order. And the first item on our agenda always is citizens' concerns. Anybody who has something to bring up briefly that is not on our agenda may approach the microphone and share what the concern is. Okay, no citizens' concerns, all right. The next item is the chairman's update. Quickly, the Acton Nursing Service will be having flu clinics. There will be 4 in September and October. It's walk-in. There's no appointment necessary. There's more information on the website, but 2 will be at the Senior Center, which is the new one at 330 Sudbury Road, Tuesday, which is, I guess, tomorrow from 1 to 4 p.m., and then Wednesday this week from 9 to 1 p.m. And the other set of clinics will be at the high school, Tuesday, the 3rd of October, and Wednesday, the 4th of October from, looks like 2:45 to 6 p.m., which is an odd number. Anyhow, Household Goods, which has been an institution in town for a while, is going to have a building naming this Wednesday in honor of the founders, Barbara and Ira Smith. Joan Gardner and I will be attending on behalf of the board. The Insulet groundbreaking will be this Thursday, the 28th at 9 a.m. On the site where Insulet has presumably completed its building, or maybe it's starting its building, whatever it's doing. Yeah, that's right, groundbreaking is just starting. That would be really fast work. I don't know. The Acton-Boxborough Community Resource Network, which formerly was known as the Safety Net, and is now a collaboration between town and school and community residents, will be having its first meeting in its reconfigured self on Thursday at 10 o'clock, and I think it's at the library. And finally, the Senior Center, this is a month in advance, the Senior Center will be having an open house on Monday, October 30th from 1 to 4 p.m. Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We will be starting our budget cycle for FY19 this week. First of all, we have the Acton Leadership Group will be meeting Thursday at 7:30 a.m. and we'll get a preliminary look at revenue forecasts and things like that. We will have to try to cut ALG short so we can go to the Insulet groundbreaking. And I also wanted to mention Governor Baker will be at the Insulet groundbreaking as well. And this coming Wednesday and Thursday, we are what we affectionately call On the Hill. We'll be in a 2-day budget review. I'll be reviewing all the operational capital requests of all the town departments, and that'll be Wednesday and Thursday after the Insulet groundbreaking. Keeping in mind that I have to make a recommended budget, or present a recommended budget to the Board of Selectmen 100 days before town meeting or shortly before Christmas, my Christmas present to the board. Finally, I attended the Mass Municipal Association's legislative breakfast this past Friday, which was at the community center in Stowe. Many of the local legislators were there, including Senator Eldridge and Representative Benson. The MMA did give an overview of state finances. This month will be kind of a key month for state revenues as they relate to their forecast for FY19 revenues. Did spend some time talking about the recreational marijuana issue, and then we heard updates from our legislators and some of the things they're working on as well. We also talked about some potential ballot questions that will be on perhaps be on the state ballot in 2018, including rolling back the sales tax, which I believe petitions are circulating. So it was a good meeting, good to see our reps, and that's my report.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. All right, we have another 5 or so minutes until our first hearing. Why don't we go through the consent agenda? Item number 9 is accept gifts. Council on Aging, Board to accept gifts totaling $9,951 to be utilized for building furnishings at the new Senior Center. Item 10, Committee appointment Karen Myers, full member, Acton-Boxborough Cultural Committee. Item 11, Committee appointment Ed Holcomb, full member Recreation Commission. Item 12, committee appointments, Franny Osmond, associate member Commission on Disability and Transportation Advisory Committee. Item 13, sign request, Acton Women's Club. Item 14, request for extension of hours, Thanksgiving and New Year's Eve, the Red Raven. Item 15, request to dispose of obsolete items, Acton Memorial Library. Item 16, one-day alcoholic beverage license, Ray Paradiso, October 14, 2017.
Motion to approve consent agenda items 9 through 16.
Katie moves and Joan seconds. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining. And, well, we could either start one of the appointments early, or we could do Selectmen's business if it's quick. Do you know, Mr. Manager, if the building commissioner's coming here to talk? Is he here? Okay. We see the town engineer, but maybe, all right, that's probably, all these other things are probably going to take too long. Why don't I'm going to suggest, because the citizens' proposal is not time-specific, I mean, maybe we should start with the presentation of the 7:15 item. The other items are hearings, so we are bound to at least read the official notices at those times and not start before the specified times. But Matt, if you'd like to get this over with early, come to the mic and do your presentation and introduce yourself and
pronounce for everyone. Make it easy. You guys can take notes. Hopefully,
great, thank you.
all good notes.
And I'll just warn you that at 7:10, I will cut it off to read a hearing for the 7:10 hearing. So, but I mean, I'll let you continue for a bit, and then we'll probably go back to the 7:10 hearing, and then go back to your item. So, go ahead.
Right, so first of all, I want to thank... Oh, there we go. Is that better? Ooh. All right, so first of all, I want to thank the Board of Selectmen for allowing me the opportunity.
Could you just state your name and where you live, please?
Sure. My name is Matt Onken, and I live at 2 Hazelnut Street over in Acorn Park. And I represent the Acton Cares Group, which is a group of concerned citizens as well as parents that are worried about and against the recreational marijuana establishments opening up here in Acton. I do want to thank you all, the board, for allowing me to come up here and talk to you, as well as the citizens here in Acton. Hopefully you're all here to support me. You are here to support me, right? Good. What I want to do first is I really want to level set some level set expectations as well as our group's goals. First thing is that Acton Cares is not looking to do a revote on the legalization of marijuana, the ballot issue from November. I know there's a lot of things that people voted on back in November that we probably would rather have a redo on, but we're not going to talk about that nor this in this setting. However, I do want to make a very specific point, that there is a difference between legalization of recreational marijuana and the commercialization of recreational marijuana establishments in Acton. Those are two completely separate issues. One has been voted on and decided. Recreational marijuana is out there. That's fine. What we are concerned about is the recreational establishments coming into Acton. The group Acton Cares also wants to make it known that medical marijuana can be beneficial. There's a time and a place for it. There's certainly ailments that people suffer from that medical marijuana does benefit. It's legal in 29 states as well as the District of Columbia, and that 60% of the US favors it. That's great. Acton, though, has two potential businesses starting up in July of 2018. Finally, I want to make it very crystal clear what we're asking. We're asking for a ban on all recreational marijuana establishments as allowed by the law. So medical marijuana dispensaries are abundant. I do want to talk about that real briefly. The local population is already serviced by two of them, one in Air and one in Lowell. I bet if you take a look at Google Maps, you'd see that's about a 20 to 25 minute drive. Basically, it's a Target run, running over to Home Depot or Lowe's on the weekend. It's the same time. So the argument that having something more local is going to be more beneficial to people in Acton really is a little bit of a specious argument, considering that it's the same amount of time it takes you to go get some Tide or something on the weekend. Acton, which has a population of 22,000 people, has 2 potential dispensaries opening in 2018. The only other cities in the entire state of Massachusetts that have 2 dispensaries, medical marijuana dispensaries, are Worcester, which has a population of 184,000, and Quincy, which has a population of 94,000. To me, that seems like there's a little bit of a discrepancy there between the number of dispensaries to population, so the per capita basis is a bit off. And I do want to put this out there as this might be something that the board, as well as the rest of the population in Acton, should really take a consideration for, have a really heartfelt and pointed discussion as to whether this makes sense to have that many per capita medical marijuana dispensaries in our area, given the fact that we already have service by 2 other facilities. But what we really want to talk about now is the recreational marijuana legalization in Massachusetts. Recreational marijuana was approved. That's great. It's fine. It's legal, but it's only legal in about 8 states. That's 16% of the US. If I were going to watch the news, whether it be CNN or Fox News or what have you, it seems like there's a lot more states that have recreational that's approved, but it is only 8 states in the US. Now, Massachusetts is one of them, and of the 351 cities and towns in the state of Massachusetts, about 1/3 of them have already banned the recreational marijuana establishments, or have put on some sort of moratorium, or have put other zoning restrictions that make it very difficult for these places to open up. Concord, Carlisle, and Littleton, our neighbors around our town here, have already done those moratoriums. They've already put those in place. And I also want to continue with the theme of there's a difference between legalization and commercialization. Even though many towns have voted in favor of the legalization, they still have gone through and put votes together to restrict it. If you look at the towns that have banned it, 32 bans are out there. 9 different communities have actually voted for the legalization, but they also voted for the ban of the recreational marijuana establishments. The moratorium, 35 out of the 67. Those are powerful numbers, and Acton needs to be up on that number list. So one of the big things about this is I want to make sure everyone here understands we're not impeding on your civil liberties. To steal the phrase from the old Revolutionary War flag, we're not treading on you. No one is being impacted by this in terms of there's no impact on residents' personal freedom to possess, to grow, to use. Heck, you can go ahead and smoke a bowl on Saturday night if you want. I don't care. But the fact is, I don't want to have a recreational marijuana establishment in our town. And in fact, each town that voted yes for the legislation has the right, under the state law that was passed in December, to put to a vote a referendum, a right to ban or restrict retail recreational marijuana, retail recreational marijuana shops. So, we got to get to the WIFM, which is the what is in it for me. And one thing I love about Acton is when I look on Zillow.com, I love seeing my house price. I like seeing it go up. And I like looking at everyone else's house that prices are going up. That's a good thing. And what I don't want to see is anything impacting everyone's overall right to have their property value and our investment in ourselves and our family to go down. If you take a case example of Colorado, homes that are within a 1 mile or a half-mile radius of a recreational marijuana establishment have seen their property values decline, as opposed to similar houses in the same county that are outside of that half-mile radius. Additionally, neighborhoods that have a grow facility, so that's a different portion, I believe, of the recreational marijuana establishment, have been declared less desirable and have had an 8.4% price discount or decrease over the other homes. Now, from the other side is the traffic and safety, and I think this one's kind of one of these no-brainer kind of things. It's a common sense. If every other place around us has decided not to have a recreational marijuana establishment, and we are the only ones, guess where everyone's going to be coming? To Acton. And what does that mean? How many people have tried to get through Kelly's Corner at 5 p.m. or when the school is letting out or getting in? That place is impossible. Anyone here that's a commuter into Boston in the morning or in the evening, that rotary at Concord or at Route 2? That's horrible. Do you think that's going to get any better? It's only going to get worse. Great Road, 2A, the stoplights between the CVS and Red Raven, that's like a drag strip. People go flying down there. There are only 2 things that can happen with more traffic here. One is going to be either congestion at these places we already talked about, or there's going to be an increase in accidents. It's just common sense. More traffic, more people, more driving, more stupid people driving, you're going to have accidents. Now, recently, on 9/19, this is Massachusetts Supreme...
Can I interrupt
You
just
bet.
a second, quickly? You're on a roll. I was
Absolutely.
waiting for you to be off the roll, but
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I lost track of the time. I was so engaged. So anyhow, the Acton Board of Selectmen will hold a public hearing on September 25, 2017 at 7:10 p.m. in the Francis Faulkner Hearing Room 204 at the Town Hall, 472 Main Street, Acton, on the application of New England Hospitality, Inc., doing business as Via Mexicana, 5 Nagog Park, Acton, Mass, under Chapter 140, what is 14D, or is it 140, Section 183A of Mass General Laws for an entertainment license. The application can be inspected at Town Hall during normal business hours. Okay, and I'll let you continue, and I'm probably going to have to interrupt after you've completed your presentation to let these folks who are here for
That's
the
fine.
7:10, but I figure they're logical break places, so go ahead.
And it's good to have them here as well so they can hear the entire speech, too.
Yeah.
I like more people hearing this. As well, I was mentioning the Massachusetts Supreme Court. On 9/19, so just last week, they issued a ruling that said police officers can no longer offer an opinion on whether an individual was high during an operating while under the influence stop or during a case. That's a bad, to me, that sounds like a bad thing. The increase in traffic, the increase of people, the potential for more accidents, and the fact that we won't know if people are out there driving high, to me, feels like a bad safety issue. That's something we should all be concerned about. So this is the figurative and literal money slide. This is the anticipated tax revenues are really offset by the infrastructure costs. So if you look at the way the law has been written, there is a maximum revenue from the tax capped at 6%. And that's broken down into two different portions. There is a local option tax, which can go up to 3%. That's negotiated. Many towns, for instance, I just found out Franklin went down to, I believe, 2% so they could attract recreational marijuana establishments into their town. And then there is a negotiable 3% cost of sale tax, or a gross sales tax. That's negotiated between the establishments and the town. So if I start just doing simple math, I looked at what an average recreational marijuana shop would do. Google is a great thing, and when you get on some of these chat boards and find out what people are willing to provide for information, it's pretty enlightening. The average facility does about $1 million worth of revenue per year. If we're only charging 6%, that means we're getting about $60,000 in tax revenue. That doesn't seem like a lot, does it? That doesn't feel like a lot. But we have to also temper this with the infrastructure that has to be added. I have an example from a sister city, which is Amherst. Population of about 38,000, so a little bit larger than us. But they said in order to if they wanted to open up one recreational marijuana facility or establishment, they were going to have to hire 2 new police officers and 4 new EMTs. That is a cost of about $550,000 a year. So let's see, we brought in $60,000 and we're spending $550,000 to get that. That means we are in the hole by $490,000 every single year. That doesn't make sense. So why do we need the police officers if it's legal? Well, we need someone to regulate it, right? We have to make sure that 21-year-olds are the only ones that are being able to get in there. We have to make sure that the businesses are doing the right things. We have to make sure that people are not smoking marijuana outside the establishment, which is illegal. So there's a lot of extra infrastructure that's associated. In fact, a March 2016 report by the Special Senate Committee on Marijuana concluded as follows. Tax revenues and fees that would be generated from legal sales may fall short of even covering the full public and social costs, including regulation, enforcement, public health and safety, and substance abuse treatment. Now, this is the state. The state who did approve this is already saying, this is untenable. We're going to lose money. They're basically sending a signal to everyone that this is a losing proposition. And where else do you think it's going to trickle down to? It's going to trickle down to the local municipalities who think they're doing the right thing, but they really aren't. They're costing the taxpayers of the town a lot of money by doing this. Finally, I think we really need to answer the question of what do we want to be when we grow up here? Do we want to be one of the few neighborhoods and towns that have a recreational marijuana establishment? Our neighbors in Concord and Carlisle and Milton have already said no. They put a moratorium on that already. Our citizens have said no as well. I have a piece of data that's not on there, but when we found out about this, a couple people went off and did an online Facebook survey, a Google survey, I believe it was. It was only 3.5 days, not very long. But we had 419 responses. 79% of those people supported a ban on recreational marijuana facilities. 77 wanted to help this process. Moving forward, we actually saw that we did a paper petition that went for about a week of registered voters, and we got another 300 people that signed up to support the ban. That's pretty good grassroots effort. Now, it's a wild west out there in terms of regulations and procedures. There are no processes, there are no regulations right now on this. In fact, the Cannabis Control Commission, which is supposed to be the regulatory committee, was just empowered, just staffed on the 1st of September. They're supposed to have a full list of regulations by March of 2018. I don't see how they can have a full set of comprehensive list of regulations ready to go that are going to judge every single eventuality that a recreational marijuana establishment will bring. In fact, Colorado continually rewrites their laws every year because things change and are so fluid, and they're trying to catch up with the system. You know, I love Acton, and Acton is first in just about everything. First in academics, first in sports, first now, hopefully, in property values and keeping that up. But this is something we don't need to be first in. We don't need to be the tip of the spear. At worst, we could take a time out and sit on the bench and see what other people are doing. Take a look at how other towns are handling this. Maybe we can wait a year or two to see how their pro formas in those towns are going. The towns that do have a medical marijuana establishment, a recreational marijuana establishment, see whether they do get good tax revenue. See how many people they did have to hire. Do comps, just like you do it if you are selling a house. See if it makes sense for us. But let's not just go forward because it is legal. Just because it is legal doesn't mean we have to do it. Look at alcohol. There are a lot of dry counties out there, right? Places that don't sell alcohol. That's the law of the land. That's been out there forever. But there are dry counties. Heck, the Jack Daniel's distillery is in a dry county. People can't drink there. So finally, in conclusion, I think it comes back down to what exactly do we want? Well, obviously, you could probably guess. We want a ban. We want a ban on the recreational marijuana establishments in Acton. And at a minimum, if we can't get the ban, we ask that the board strongly consider a moratorium so we don't put the town's finances, the people's property values at risk. See what other people are doing and make sure that we are going to do the right thing. Finally, formally, we request the Board of Selectmen add the question of banning recreational marijuana establishments on the ballot for a town vote. And with that, I want to thank the board for taking the time to listen to me. I want to thank the people here in the audience for showing up and showing the support, hopefully, for the ban on recreational marijuana establishments. Thank you.
You have one more thing to say?
I was just going to say, if we have one quick second, we do have a
No, what I'm going to
after
do is, you've done your presentation, so everybody has a chance to think about that. I'm going to go back to this hearing that was supposed to start at 7:10. This is Via Mexicano. Is somebody here from Via Mexicano about, oh, great. I think that this will actually be fairly easy and quick. If you could just really briefly introduce yourself and explain what you're looking for.
Sure. My name's Carol Quinones. I'm the general manager of Villa Mexicana. We wanted to apply for an entertainment license. We'd like to have the opportunity to bring the town bingo night, trivia night, dance night, a DJ on the weekends, and things like that. I think the town would really benefit from it.
Okay. Questions from the board? Katie?
Sure, I think one of the, you want to have music some nights, and so one of my questions is just, is it all inside?
Yes, and it's
Okay.
for the weekends only.
Okay, but it would be until 12 a.m., so I just want to make sure. I mean, you're in a shopping plaza. There are some neighbors nearby, but just make sure you kind of moderate sound and
Correct.
are aware of that. And obviously, if we hear complaints, we'd have to bring you back, but otherwise, I think it sounds like an interesting opportunity for you to expand what you offer, so that's great.
Anybody else? Joan?
Would the salsa dance night be different than the Thursday through Sunday?
The salsa, we haven't decided what day we'd do salsa dancing. We did want to do a trivia night. We still haven't decided on the days. We've gotten a lot of feedback from the community, and they'd like something on the weekends to be able to get out of their house. You know, the town kind of dies out after 9. There's not really much to do. They have to go into Boston or the neighboring towns to be able to, you know, enjoy themselves. So we wanted to bring that to them.
Anybody else? Motion, something?
I'll move to approve the entertainment license for Via Mexicana.
Second.
Katie moves and Joan seconds. Are there any questions or comments from the audience about this application for an entertainment license?
Yeah, I would like
Oh,
to
Peter.
add a restriction that it be Thursday through Sunday, 9 PM to 12 AM, and indoors only. And I'd note that as far as entertainment goes, your application, I'm assuming this is what the license covers, is acoustic music, vocal music, having a disc jockey, karaoke, and jukebox. So I'm not sure that trivia, you need a license to have a trivia night. Maybe
No,
if you
but
have,
we
if you
did wanna-
consider that a disc jockey. But anyway, I'd add those restrictions, which
I
seem
think
to be
that's just
consistent
their,
with what.
yeah, I think that's just because that's what.
That's
their
what's on the
That shows the
application
options.
for, yeah. So
I
it's
think
to
trivia
approve.
night will probably be quieter than some of these things that are specified as
Just if you
being
want
covered in the
music.
license, but yeah, she did say that the intention is to have everything indoors, but I think it certainly doesn't hurt, given our recent experience with some entertainment license, to specify that the activity be indoors. I mean, you are in an area where you're not too right abutting a residential area, but it's possible sound will travel, as Katie said, so it would be good to do that. But, okay, so it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining. Congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
I have to read another hearing notice. It's 7:25. We will get back to the marijuana discussion, but, okay. Under MGL 140, Section 58, the Acton Board of Selectmen will hold a public hearing on September 25, 2017 at 7:25 PM in the Francis Faulkner Hearing Room in Town Hall, 472 Main Street, Acton, on the application of Wheeler Dealer, Inc. for a Class 2 auto dealer's license at 63 Powder Mill Road, Acton, Mass. 01720. The application can be inspected at Town Hall during normal business hours. Since this is the time for you to come up, why don't you come up and just introduce yourselves and explain what you're looking for from the board. And I think this will be pretty straightforward, but...
Hello. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Vigin Alakhverdov. I'm one of the owners of Wheeler Dealer Incorporation. We're here today, hopefully get approval from Town of Acton to open a used car dealership. I honestly believe this would be beneficiary for the town. We did a little bit of research and we noticed there are a few new car dealerships in the town, but there's really not many options for affordable used car vehicles, and that's what we're going to focus on. Pretty much the main goal is going to be selling high quality pre-owned used car vehicles, affordable. Majority of the vehicles going to be under $8,000, so they're going to be very affordable for residents. Yeah, we already have a good experience in the area, in the industry. We've been doing it for more than 10 years, and you know, would like to have another opportunity to be a part of the town. Yeah.
Okay. Questions from the board? Comments? Yeah, Katie.
No, my only comment, I think it sounds great. My only comment was just the note from our planning director that some site modifications might require a site plan special permit, so just make sure you're coordinating
Oh yeah, absolutely.
with them to
We'll-
do that. But otherwise, I think it looks great, and I would make a motion to approve the application for Wheeler Dealer, Inc. for a Class 2 auto dealer's license.
Second.
Okay, so Katie moves and Ching Sung seconds. Anybody else have questions or comments? No. Any comments, questions from the audience? All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You won't regret. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. We do have another appointment at 7:30, but I think we have some flexibility, although the planning department's going to scream when I say that. So I'm going to ask, I don't know if, Matt, if you want to come back up, and maybe we can open up a bit of discussion about this. I will caution everybody that the town manager and I squeezed this onto our agenda last Thursday, and the idea was that we would give Matt and his group a chance to introduce the subject. I honestly don't know that if there's a decision that people want the board to make about anything, that we would have say if you wanted to pursue a ballot vote. You know, that is something that the Board of Selectmen has to decide to approve, and at this point we've heard sort of one side. We've gotten a lot of comments via email from people across the town weighing in one way or the other, and so we would want to have more information, including from our own police department and Board of Health, before we were to decide to put something on the ballot. If you are interested in pursuing moratorium, that's a different process. You can collect, you can have a petition article with signatures, or if the board is inclined to do so, they can authorize the placement of the article on the warrant. We have already had town council review I guess the original petition articles that your group had submitted, and we've also had town council provide some guidance about the moratorium options. So we have the language, and either way, I think we could move forward with that. That process would be a little simpler because typically the ballot initiative doesn't happen until, it wouldn't happen until March, a week before town meeting in 2018, unless we decided it was really urgently necessary that we have a ballot vote before that, but anyhow. So,
and I guess procedurally,
yeah.
Does obtaining a moratorium first preclude or exclude the ballot or the opt-out version on the ballot later? It just gives us more time to collect more information.
Yeah. I mean, the moratorium, I think the reason a lot of towns are, or not a lot, but the towns that are doing it often are going to moratorium is because, as you said, the Cannabis Control Commission, which is just such a funny name, has not even, barely been formed, and it hasn't promulgated its regulations, which is why, you know, there are a lot of questions that are unanswered that people have, which is why some people are leery of the whole law, because there's just no definition to it, because there are no regulations. So, but that is not due to happen, as you said, until March, if, you know, optimally. I think that the proposed moratorium, according to council, would go to the end of next year, which we would hope would allow more than enough time for the commission to come out with its regulations. Nothing, if you have a moratorium, it certainly doesn't preclude you, the town, from going forward with a proposal to prohibit recreational marijuana facilities in the town. So they're not, you know, it's not as if one trumps the other. So.
Okay, fantastic. Well, one thing I'd like to do now, if the board does not mind, we have a doctor here. Her name is Dr. He. She's here to talk about her personal experience treating opiate addiction, and she has a very unique, I think, perspective on both medical marijuana as well as recreational marijuana, and how that impacts the general populace, if that's acceptable to the board.
Yeah, I would add, though, that, I mean, the aim is here, if we're going to have a full discussion, I mean, at some point, we really need to schedule another meeting to have a full discussion, because as I said, I'd be happy to have the doctor speak, but I think that at some point, I need to know where the board is, what the board is inclined to do, what you really are inclined to do. You're really preferring going with the prohibition and then alternatively the moratorium.
And I think the Acton Cares group is absolutely open to having a larger based discussion. I mean, that's part of how democracy works. We have both sides come in, present, talk about the pros and cons. Obviously, we want to win, but I think it's absolutely an option that we would be happy to do.
Yeah, and I think that...
So we'd work with you on the
yeah,
dates and
that would be
times.
great, because I do think, given the number of people in the audience, I don't know how many people have already weighed in by email, but one of the things, if we were to proceed with a full-blown discussion, usually there's an effort to limit the amount of repetition by, you know, having people who've already weighed in and writing not go to the mic, and people who go to the mic not repeating what other people before them had repeated. You know, this is a very large crowd. We're clearly not going to be able to complete a discussion today and hear from everybody
You
because
guys
we
don't
have...
have time to hear from everyone?
Yeah, we're, sorry. So that is why I wanted to assure people that once I've gotten some input, we can hear from the doctor, and then what I want to do is caucus with my colleagues about what they're inclined to do. And if we decide that we have to move on because we're going to need another full-blown discussion before we make any kind of decision, then that's what we'll do. I really do appreciate that everybody has shown up here. I hope everybody wasn't hoping that this was going to be their chance to be on TV because we are televised, but you'll have another chance if we decide to have another meeting with a discussion. So just if you want to bring the doctor up, that's fine, since her perspective is a little bit unique. And then I'm going to have the board sort of talk and decide what to do next, okay?
Fantastic.
And I just don't want people in the audience to be annoyed that I'm cutting them off because you will have another opportunity to weigh in, so.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thank you for allowing me to give my 2 cents. We'll be very short. So I've been practicing medicine, internal medicine for 20 years. For the past 4 years, I started participating narcotic treatment and in my own practice and a part-time job. So just want to give my 2 cents about marijuana and other substance abuse. Most of the time from my observation, also the research, clinical research proven, substance abuse always, most of the time is coexisting with mental health issue, like a depression, most prevalent depression, anxiety, sleeping disorder, conductive disorder, and usually they are connected with each other. Which one is the egg, which one is the chicken, we don't know. It's certainly marijuana or substance abuse can cause mental health issues. Then the second point I want to make is oftentimes during the treatment of those substance abuse patients, alcohol, marijuana, narcotics, you will find that historically the socially acceptable, legalized substance will be abused by the individual first. And later on, they develop more serious abuse, like opiates or life-threatening abuse. So this is also in consideration. We certainly don't want our community youngsters easily get exposed to marijuana. And recently, I also just a phenomenon, I see growing number of young people looking for help to get off drug. So that's also another point I wanted to make. So that's the several reasons from my perspective. We want to stop the spread of marijuana usage. And we wanted to stop early exposure to our youngest for marijuana exposure in order to stop the future bad behaviors. That's all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to now confer, board members. I'd like you to tell me what you are inclined to do right now or about this whole issue. Katie, you.
Okay, thank you, and thank you to people coming tonight. So I want to say that I'm supportive generally of legalizing recreational marijuana. I didn't actually vote for question 4 because I had concerns with how the ballot question was worded and some of the provisions in that. However, it passed in this state, and in Acton, close to 12,967 people came out and voted in our latest election, and just over 51% voted yes, and 47% voted no, with the other 2% leaving it blank. If we're talking about putting this on a municipal ballot, in our last municipal elections in 2017, 1,337 people voted. In 2016, 360 people voted, and in 2015, 602 people voted. In 2 of those elections, that means there were fewer people voted in total than what was the difference between who voted for yes and no on question 4 in Acton. And so while I understand that you feel that there's a difference between voting yes on question 4 and voting on whether or not to have recreational marijuana allowed in your town, For me, if our town voted for question 4, then they are comfortable in the majority with having recreational marijuana allowed in this state. And so unless we wait until another presidential election when we would expect there to be close to 13,000 people coming again to vote, I don't feel comfortable allowing only the few hundred to maybe under 2,000 people vote on this issue. And what bothers me and what I'm most concerned about with what's been brought up or sort of said is that, well, we don't want this in our town, and we don't want this for our kids, and we don't want this for our property values. So my question is, who do you want this for? Name for me the towns or communities that you feel like it's okay for their kids, or it's okay for their property values. And if the answer is you can't name those communities, because if you think it's not okay for your kid, then why is it okay for a kid who lives in Lynn or who lives in Amherst or wherever across the state? It's not, in your view. But if you believe that, then you think that there should not be recreational marijuana allowed anywhere. And so you are saying, you are re-litigating or re-voting this question. And to me, again, the majority of the state came out and said, we support recreational marijuana. The majority of this town came out and said, we support recreational marijuana. And that means they need to be comfortable with it happening in your community. And I'm frankly a little tired of a lot of this NIMBY, not in my backyard, hypocrisy, where people want to say, I want access to recreational marijuana, I just don't want it to be anywhere near me, but it's okay if it's in Boston. Well, that's not acceptable to me. So I frankly am not supportive of putting this on a local municipal ballot, and I wouldn't vote in favor of that. If you want to bring a moratorium to town meeting, I think you can get the signatures and we can talk about that, and the board will take a position on that as we do on everything else. And I don't have a vote either way right now on a moratorium, but I think that citizens can, and if they are interested, go ahead and do that. So I think it should be a citizens petition if they want to bring a moratorium, and I'm not supportive of a ballot question at a local election.
Okay, yeah, that was what I wanted to get feedback from the board on, was just sort of briefly whether if you were interested, if you thought you wanted to do a ballot initiative, whether you wanted more information. I assume that you would want more information than we have tonight to vote. The alternative was the moratorium, and if you were inclined to pursue a moratorium, in what fashion? Because I didn't know if you want the citizens to collect the signatures, or if anybody on the board is inclined to just have the board put it on the warrant. It sounds as if Katie has made it clear that this is really up to the citizens with regard to the moratorium, and you don't support the ballot vote. What about other people on the board? Just quickly, because we're now I don't want to have this take up too much time. I think we are going to have to schedule another discussion about this because clearly there's a lot of interest in it, but I want to see quickly what the board's inclinations are. Peter?
No, I was just going to say, I agree that we need a lot more information about the issue. These social studies have, both sides have arguments about the impact of recreational marijuana stores. Katie's figures about the numbers of people who voted are interesting. I would support a moratorium because right now, the commission is not going to even come out with regulations until March 1st. We don't know what those will be. It'd be nice to know what those are before we put anything on a ballot. They can't open stores until July. The moratorium would only go through the end of next year anyway. That seems to me to be a reasonable period of time. I'm not sure that we would have any applications or any stores would actually be able to open before January 1st, 19 anyway. So it seems to me a moratorium is reasonable. I have a lot more questions about a ballot initiative, and to me that's a democratic process issue as much as a social aspect of this program issue. So if we were going to, if we did feel by a majority that a moratorium was a good idea, I'd favor us telling people that today rather than requiring them to go out and get 200 signatures between now and, which I'm sure they could do between now and I guess October 31st, I'm told, is when we'll have to close the warrant.
Thank you, Peter. Ching-Sung?
So I have no problems with a moratorium warrant article appearing on our town meeting. I always think it's a good idea for citizens to be able to vote on the issues that they care about, and so that's that. I would not support a moratorium because, like Peter said, I don't think any institution in practice is going to be able to open in this state for recreational
You
usage.
mean a prohibition? You mean the ballot vote on?
No, I mean the moratorium
Oh.
on town meeting.
Okay.
If we want to put it on the town meeting and just avoid having them have the trouble of collect 200 signatures and whatever, because it's very clear that they'll probably get there, right? So I think that we can avoid the time and the effort of everyone and just put it on the ballot because clearly people want to vote on it and talk about it, and so that's fine. We can go ahead and vote on it and talk about it at town meeting. That's not a problem. Like I said, I would not support the moratorium article, mostly because I think that, like Peter pointed out, in practice, you're not going to see a recreational marijuana establishment be able to open before, any regulations are in place. After those regulations are in place, all of those will apply. And, yeah, sure, regulations will get rewritten. They always get rewritten. And, any institutions will still have to comply. So I think that, if you're concerned about what the regulations are, that's at the state level that you have to work on that. As far as local ballot initiative is concerned, and the full ban would be concerned, I think Katie's concerns as far as the timing of the ballot and the number of people involved in the vote is valid. And so therefore, I would recommend that if we wanted to do that, that we do so in at least a midterm election year, but probably a presidential election year where we're likely to see far more turnout. I would say wait for 2020, and the moratorium article we vote on at town meeting could easily extend the moratorium to that date. I think that wouldn't be a particular issue because to me a moratorium that ends in 2019 sometime, whether it's January 1st or somewhere later in the year or runs until the election or runs until the presidential election, there's not a huge difference as far as in practice. I feel that would be concerned.
Okay, I don't know, Mr. Manager, if you have any information about how long the moratorium can extend. I was under the impression that it had to be a reasonable duration, and one of council's proposed draft would extend it to the end of 2018 because the idea was this cannabis commission was supposed to come out, promulgate its regulations sometime next year, and that would give communities that had some reservations about the law itself to look at the regulations and then decide if they wanted to do anything further. But I don't know if having a moratorium extend for several years until, an election period when it was convenient for the town to drum up a lot of attendance would be permissible.
My understanding from town council is that, as you know, warrant articles have to be approved by the Attorney General, and the Attorney General has not been approving any moratorium articles longer than 1 year.
Okay, so, but at least you're willing to put it on a warrant with the BOS just doing it rather than making, if we're inclined, okay. Joan?
I am in favor of going for the moratorium on the town meeting.
And are you inclined to have the board just to vote, authorize doing it, or do you want to have residents collect signatures?
I think they've collected enough signatures so that.
Well, they have to collect, they have to
petition.
collect it on the specific language that council has said is okay. That's why council needs to review the language. That was originally why we had council reviewing the original warrant petition article language to make sure that it was okay so that they went out to collect. When they went out to collect the language, it wouldn't have sort of legal problems and force them to have to go back out and collect more signatures. So we have the language from council for the proposed moratorium. So they could easily go out and collect them, or if, as Peter and Ching-Sung had said, if we're inclined to put it on the warrant ourselves, then we should tell them so that they don't have to go out and collect the signatures.
Yes, I'm in favor of that.
Okay, so we've got, okay. And finally, I happen to think that the moratorium is an easier way for us to go. Everything will happen sooner too. But I've told the group last Thursday that I did not vote for question 4 because I looked at the proposed statute and had real reservations about just why it was so complicated, and at the same time, it's so complicated, but have they covered the things that really matter? And so I don't know who drafted it, so if I had some faith in the people who drafted it, then it would be different perhaps, but I just wasn't comfortable supporting proposed legislation that was essentially going to tie the hands of our legislators who are professionals at drafting legislation. In any event, I would be inclined to support the moratorium. It makes a lot of sense to me, given the timing of the proposed issuance of the regulations, which won't be out until next year, if then. The regulations may or may not be to people's liking, but at least we'll have a better sense of where the law is going to go and what is going to be covered and what isn't, and where the holes are. And at that point, once the regulations are out, then the town has another opportunity to talk about, well, do we need to do something more, such as prohibit facilities altogether, by which time we will all be so seasoned and knowledgeable about the topic that it probably won't take long at all. But so I would be inclined to do that, and I also would be inclined to just, have the board vote to put the article on the warrant without requiring that the supporters go out and collect signatures. So do you want to vote on that now, or do you want more information before you vote that? Folks?
I'll move that we put on the warrant for the special town meeting on December 4th the question of whether the town should implement a moratorium on opening recreational marijuana facilities consistent with the language that council suggests through December 31st, 2018.
Second.
Okay, Peter moves, and Ching Sung and Joan, or I think, was it Joan? You seconded? Okay. Any further discussion? Are there any questions? You have questions, comments before we vote?
No, I just wanted to, first of all, thank you guys for the feedback. It's very, very appreciative. I do want to make a couple quick minor points. Number one is, it is written into the state law that any town that did vote yes for legalizing marijuana does have the option and the right to do an opt-out vote. So if it gets to it, it is on this record that we can, as a group, push for, have that put on as a voter referendum. So I just want to make that first thing clear. But, and as well, remember, the laws are definitely separate. Possession and growing, which is the option, the Article 4 option 4 that was passed, is completely different than actually selling or having and operating a facility. Those are two completely different entities. It's the same thing as, again, being able to have, own, possess, or drink a beer in your house, as opposed to having a liquor store. So those are completely different entities. But thank you very much for the time and for the vote.
Madam Chair,
Thank you, yes.
I think there's a very important legal question here, and I'm not sure I know the answer, but legally, as I understand it right now, the Board of Selectmen is the only legal authority that can put something on a ballot election. You seem to think, based on the language of the new marijuana law, that somehow you can do a citizen's petition to place a question. We're talking about ballot elections versus town meeting warrants.
Okay.
I'm not aware, and I think the town manager has explained to me that there's no way for a citizen's petition to put a ballot question on the election. So I may be wrong about that.
This is the local level. It's town.
Right.
It's town level. Obviously, there's a procedure at the state level, but town manager said that there is no process at the town level for that.
All right, so that's something I think
So that's why it
that's
would-
definitely an action item, I think, on
Yeah,
our
that
side
would
of
be
have to
why
take and
it's-
see if there's, and I'm not a lawyer either, so I'm kind of spouting off things that you read on websites that give you a lot of great information. However, I think that's something we need to have some closure on to make sure that that is factual or the
Okay.
right thing.
Mr. Manager?
The Town Council City Solicitors Association is actually having a half-a-day workshop at Holy Cross. I think it's October 2nd or 3rd. I think you may be going, Janet. One of the attorneys in our town council's office is making part of the presentation. So a lot of this, I think, will get clear at that workshop.
I'll pick his brain during a break, but anyhow.
That'd be great.
yeah.
Thank you.
But,
Appreciate
okay,
it.
so we have Ali, did you have something you wanted to say before? Because you've been working, I know you've been working so hard to pull a lot of the things together.
I just want to add to what Matt said. It's, we know Board of Selectmen has the authority to decide whether to put the question on the ballot. And we had the community survey, and we had informal public petition signature collection. And the support of the movement, it's overwhelming. We get response in very short time. So the 315 signatures are collected less than a week. So the support is overwhelming, and people's will is very clear. So we make the Acton Care group make a plea to the Board of Selectmen to honor people's request to consider, to give people the power to decide. Even the votes, it's in past town election, it's much less than the presidential election. That depends on the issue. If the people really care about the issue, people will come out to vote. But give people the right, give people the power to make their own decision. We just ask the Board of Selectmen to consider that. So here I want to present this signature we collect to the board.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Ali, and thank you for all of your work on this issue. So, all right, we have a motion and a second, and I think we'll vote. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Abstaining, was that you, Katie? Okay, okay, so we have 4-1-0 vote, okay. And so there will be a warrant article addressing the possibility of a moratorium on any consideration of recreational marijuana, anything, including stores, on the special town meeting warrant for December 4th. And so I'm sure there's going to be more discussion before that. I think that we are, as I said, going to have to get some input from our own police department and our Board of Health and other people. So those are public meetings. So people who are interested in the issue are certainly welcome to attend and just keep track of what we're talking about, because I think some people were surprised that we had medical marijuana applicants talking to us. Yeah, you have to monitor our boring agendas, and sometimes we have some interesting items, so that we don't necessarily go and broadcast widely, because most people don't care. They're not interested. But yeah, keep an eye out, and I'll be in touch with the citizens group if and when we schedule a discussion about recreational marijuana. So, but thank you very much for all of you for coming out. It's really exciting to have such a big crowd in room 204, because we often outnumber the people in the audience, and as the evening goes on, see, this is fairly early for us, the evening goes on, 10 o'clock, it's really deadly, you know, and we feel bad for the few people who are stuck in the audience. So, but thank you very much, all of you. Okay.
How you doing, Bill?
Okay, I'd ask you to leave quietly. Never mind, this is just, okay. Because we are going to continue our meeting. Maybe I can call, we have 7:30 Kelly's Corner infrastructure plans. If you folks come up here, maybe things will quiet down. And thank you, Roland and Kristen, for abiding by it.
So we have two key topics that we wanted to discuss tonight about the Kelly's Corner infrastructure project. The first is a project schedule overview in a little bit more detail than we kind of ran through quickly last time. And also the town meeting votes that will be required to move the project forward. And then getting back to the discussion about the streetscape for the Complete Streets project improvements in front of 300 Main Street, which is owned by the Acton Historical Society and where the Hosmer House is located. So in your packets, right behind, I think, the PowerPoint, is a much more detailed project schedule from GPI. That itemizes every single task that has to be accomplished to get the project done. On the screen is really a summarized version of that, honing in on some of the key federal highway standard reviews for historic review, because I know that's been kind of a big question and topic lately. So we're hoping to provide a little bit more clarity on that tonight as well. So in November, just in a few months from now, the Acton Historical Commission will be receiving a letter for formal comment from GPI, the town's engineering consultant, and that letter will be copied to Mass Historical Commission, the state's Historic Preservation Officer, and Mass DOT's Cultural Resource Unit. So that is a requirement of the 25% design submission to Mass DOT. So that will be included in their submission, and we, in November, expect the submission to be given to Mass DOT at that time. And this is really when the early environmental coordination starts to take place. So that's when the environmental reviews and historic reviews start to come together. Those are required by MIPA and NEPA. In the spring of 2018 is when we expect to have the 25% Mass DOT design public hearing. So all of those comments that are compiled by the Acton Historical Commission that have been submitted on the entire project, not necessarily just 300 Main Street, and any others from Mass DOT, will be listed and presented at the public hearing. The public hearing will be posted, so it gives an opportunity for everyone to attend, and additional comments can be voiced at that public hearing as well. It's recorded and it's a very formal process. Oops. Following in October of 2018, the 75% design submission to MassDOT is expected at that time. And this is when the formal MIPA and NEPA filings are made. So that includes, again, all of the environmental and historic review processes that are up here. At that time, Mass DOT's Cultural Resource Unit will be evaluating the comments received, the information on the historic properties, and they will be making the determination of either adverse or no adverse effect. In November of 2018 is when we expect to receive the NEPA approval. So again, this is a expected project schedule, so if there are aspects of the plan that need to be modified, this may be pushed back to, to address some of the issues if there are any. In July 2019 is when we expect to submit the 100% design to MassDOT, and then in 2020, in January, is when we expect to receive approval of the plans. So there are 4 different articles that will be required for town meeting approval in order to move the project forward. We anticipate 2 of those occurring at this December special town meeting. The first is Article 97, which requires any land that's in conservation use in this particular case, we're planning on needing basically a sliver of land, and that needs to go to town meeting to authorize the selectmen to petition the legislature. We're still waiting to hear back from council on a little bit of guidance on that particular issue. We may or may not need to move forward with this. The other one is authorization for the Board of Selectmen to proceed with property acquisitions. So this particular town meeting warrant article is not a monetary item. It's merely giving the authorization to the selectmen to proceed with acquisitions. And we're proposing this for special town meeting in December because we have received advanced authorization to move forward with Community Lane or No Name Road. And that's one of the more difficult acquisitions that will take place. It's much more complicated. In April 2018 town meeting, we expect to have a capital request for appraisal services. And in 2019, we expect to have the capital request for funding the property acquisition compensations to make sure that there is just compensation for all of the property acquisitions. And between that time period is when, we expect to receive NEPA clearance, so we would be able to move forward with the appraisal process at that time. So I'm going to leave this slide up just for a second so you can read it. But this project is a project being funded for construction through federal highway, and because of that, we have to follow the NEPA compliance process. And through that process, all of the environmental and historic regulations and requirements basically come under this umbrella. So when I talk about NEPA compliance or NEPA clearance, it basically means all of those things. So for this purpose, it's kind of the umbrella review. Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act has very specific steps to follow. So when thinking about how different reviews will occur, I know 300 Main Street has been really the big kind of topic of discussion lately, so it's kind of good to keep that in mind when thinking about how the review will take place. We know it's on the National Register of Historic Places, so we know that there will be a review done by the Mass DOT Cultural Resource Unit in conjunction with Mass Historical Commission, and they will make the determination of adverse or no adverse effect. If there is a finding of adverse effect, they'll go through basically a 3-step process. So they'll look at, can it be avoided? If not, can the effect be minimized and still get the project done? If not, how do you mitigate that effect? So that's what they're going to be looking at. And as I mentioned before, public involvement is really key. It always is, not just because that's kind of how we've always done projects in Acton, but it's a requirement. So that will be throughout this entire project. So getting back to 300 Main Street, I know when we met before, we talked about trying to maybe look at some additional things that we could do, or bring in the landscape architect, the DRB, and have additional discussions. So since that time, we've met with the Historical Society 2 more times and also had 2 site meetings. The Design Review Board offered their services, and we had additional services provided outside of the original scope through the landscape architect at GPI. So the original layout here, just for your reference, this is the Hosmer House. It's a little light, but you can kind of see the outline there. The red line is the property line. And this particular concept was basically consistent throughout the rest of Kelly's Corner. There's a 6-foot concrete sidewalk, 8-foot grass strip buffer with street trees and pedestrian lighting. And then this is the landscaped island approach at every single approach in Kelly's Corner on either side of Main Street and either end of Mass Ave. This particular concept would have required about a 10-foot taking. And you can see here the stone wall in the front. A majority of it's actually on the town property. The other stone walls, this stone wall's on the line, and that one's over here, just for reference. So the other alternative that we looked at and talked to the selectmen about last time was a reduction in the pedestrian buffer. So reducing the grass strip down to 4 feet with a stamped brick pattern and possibly having some type of landscaping in there and pedestrian lighting. This was modified after taking into consideration the comments and concerns heard by the Historical Society members. And the landscaped island here was reduced due to concerns voiced about the left turn access into the property. And so that area here was reduced and now just shown as like pavement markings. The last kind of more simple option that we talked about last time was removing that buffer altogether. So taking away any pedestrian buffer or street trees between the roadway and the sidewalk. This particular layout would have about a 5.5-foot sidewalk, and everything else would basically remain the same. There are also 2 other concepts that the landscape architect worked on with the DRB to try to see how they could kind of highlight the Historical Society property in the Hosmer House to bring more attention to it as a resource here in Acton. So they came up with some other design ideas to talk to the Historical Society about. So those are just shown here. Both basically would just be additional work to improve accessibility on their site and access to their site and visual kind of cues. So we are kind of looking to the selectmen at this point to get some guidance on how you would suggest moving forward for the 25% design submission. So if you have any questions or anything else.
Thanks, Kristen. Questions from the board, comments, anybody? I'll start with Peter this time. Peter?
Thank you. On the first slide, or maybe it's the second slide, it talks about November 17th, the letter is sent to the local historical commission. There was a question at one of our meetings about the status of the historical society given the 106 process. So is it your understanding that the letter only goes to the historical commission? Because I thought I remembered when they were talking about the monopoles along the railroad right-of-way that they were supposed to send a letter to the Historical Society also. They had the wrong address or something. Right.
Send it to the
the
Historical
other way.
Society.
Yeah.
They were supposed to send it to the
Oh, okay.
Historical Commission.
Yeah, they had it.
Luckily, there are people
backwards,
who are
yeah.
on both.
Okay, so, but is it your understanding now that the Historical Society isn't notified directly and any comments just go through the commission?
So through this requirement, through the federal highway requirement, they have to basically give a letter and request a letter of request to the Mass Historical Commission, but there are engineers, so we can tell them we want them to send a letter to the Acton Historical Society as well.
Okay, that's right, I guess. I mean, I thought there was also a question about whether there would be more funds needed to appropriate at the December town meeting for design services, increased design services. That's not listed here.
Yes, I'm actually glad you mentioned that, but that's something that we discussed with the budget working group to bring forward for a spring town meeting article, April 2018, and I believe we're looking at about $300,000 extra, about that amount. We added a buffer in there because we also anticipate wanting, there's been some discussion with the design review board about wanting some additional landscape design services possibly, and so to make sure that we cover that in case it's needed. So trying to anticipate future costs as well. But thank you for mentioning that.
Okay, then I guess the big question I have is, given that it's not until November of 18 that you have approval to proceed with the acquisition process. I'm very unclear about this whole town meeting approving authorization versus selectmen voting to, or approving acquisition versus selectmen voting to go forward with that acquisition versus town meeting then funding acquisition. And I know we have issues with the Acton Historical Society. I would dearly like to avoid a fight at town meeting, basically. And so is it possible just to, and so we need more time, I think. Is it possible just to get permission to acquire Community Lane, since that's the only one you can talk about, and put off the other acquisition authorizations by town meeting until April?
In theory, yes, we could do that. I think strategically we thought it would be a good idea to ask for all of them at once, basically as a project, because if one acquisition fails, the whole project fails. And so basically it's an indication also kind of taking a pulse of the town, in terms of this vote. So that was kind of our thought process with that. I think more specifically, we definitely want to proceed with Community Lane. That's kind of the priority of why we're doing it then. But that was the thought process also as a clump.
Okay, thank you. I want to commend you and the whole planning staff and Kelly's Corner Advisory Committee. I mean, this has just been a huge project. You're moving along, a lot of hard work involved. I think the issues are being dealt with sensitively. But I think there are, clearly with a project this size, there are going to be lots of issues, so thank you.
Katie? Yeah, so first I want to echo Peter in thanking the planning department and the DRB and the Kelly's Corner Committee, as well as the Historical Society and the Historical Commission for talking about the, everybody else for working on this bigger project, and then also trying to figure out how to proceed with the 300 Main Street acquisition and what to do there. My question was sort of Peter's, and I think it's worth thinking about whether or not we go forward with all of the request for all of the acquisitions at the special town meeting in December. I agree with Peter that the timing is just a little off in terms of the letter being not being sent until November, and so it feels like if we could get have a little more time for some of those conversations and to get more input and try to figure out, what is a solution that everybody can hopefully agree to before we request that authorization, it might have a better chance of passing as well, because I also don't want this one issue to hold up all of the other acquisitions, and I think it can. We always see at a town meeting that if there's a vocal minority that has concerns about, their, one issue, it can really sway town meeting. And I think there are concerns and legitimate issues related to this one acquisition in particular, and I wouldn't want that one to hold up all the rest of them. And while I understand wanting, it can't go forward if we eventually don't get that one acquisition, I think that given more time, we hopefully can get there. So I don't want to rush ourselves and get to a no vote when we could spend a little more time and hopefully get to a yes vote. I think that the Historical Society has been, meeting with folks and you guys, and hopefully is willing to continue to meet and willing to figure out what a solution is so that we can get to a yes on this whole project. So that would be, I think, my leaning right now, and recommendation would be to rethink about going to December town meeting with only the community lane acquisition and going towards annual town meeting with the rest of them, just to give us more time to figure out how to get a yes on it. Because I don't want it to be a no and then the whole project is, off the rails. So, and I don't think anybody wants that, and I don't think the Historical Society or the Historical Commission wants that. So, but I also don't want their concerns to just be railroaded either. So I think we've got to, recognize that there's a unique issue going on here and try to deal with it separately.
Jing-Sung?
So Peter asked my one question about the funding. And as far as the timing for the thing that both Peter and Katie have spoken on, it's my understanding that this is because you need our authorization to talk to people about the overall particulars of the acquisition, right?
So the Board of Selectmen's authorization for property acquisition, that means basically it allows the selectmen to take land by gift, by eminent domain, by taking any other form. That vote is required in order to then move forward with the acquisition process. So when it comes down to it, the appraisers will do their work, and then the selectmen eventually sign off on the legal documents that basically take the land or accept the
But
deal.
you can't actually, don't you need the funding to do that too? I thought at the end of the day, when you do that, you also need the monetary aspect, which you're not getting here, right?
Right.
So none of the acquisitions can actually go forward until you get the money in
Right, correct.
in 2018. So that was what my understanding was that it was to start the process, but you can't complete it until you get the funding for it in the actual financial article whenever you do it.
Exactly.
So I really am kind of amenable to it either way, because at the end of the day, the final approval is the funding, is the money article, right? If they don't approve the money for it, doesn't matter what's gone before that, the entire acquisition is going down. So really, whatever ends up being the board's preference, I'm happy to go with for whether or not you want to do the acquisition. You want to start the process a little bit earlier, or you want to push it off until April. I don't think it makes much of a difference either way. I guess, are we doing the guidance on the Hosmer House thingy? Is that also what we're doing here? Are we talking about that?
I think Kristen said at the end, she was requesting guidance. I mean, if you have any comments about, say, all the alternative plans, feel free to address them.
Okay, I happen to like alternatives 2 and 4. That's my personal preference, though, so I thought I would throw that in there.
Joan, anything?
Yeah, no, I would be in favor of going forward at this town meeting.
Going forward with the special town meeting in December with the
Yes.
whole bundle? Okay. I would really, I like the fact that there's been a lot of discussion about the Hosmer House, because I gather that of all the pieces of the Kelly's Corner infrastructure improvement, that is the one like sticking point. I know that at the last meeting, the last discussion we had, you did say that some of the proposed property owners whose property would be affected by the acquisitions were maybe not really wild with enthusiasm, but I don't know if they had any really strenuous objections. But my impression was that the Hosmer House was the real sticking point, and it's not just because the Historical Society has concerns. I think it's because we all have concerns, and I'm the liaison for the Design Review Board, so I hear about what they think. I know one of the things they talked about, because they were talking about the trees, the 2 existing trees, one of which would have to go, it seems under any scenario, is that they talked about planting better trees, because I think some of the landscape architect on the DRB didn't think that the existing trees were necessarily all that healthy. So, which I thought was interesting. And I thought that, I'd like to have their input involved, because I do think that whatever happens there, the buffer between the house and the road is really, really maybe not optimal. Obviously, it was established at a time when there was a lot less traffic, but now it's sort of out there. And I think they had talked about, well, using the proximity to sort of draw more positive attention to the house, because people just sort of whip by it and don't necessarily see it, and maybe it's a matter of setting it off with some landscaping, which I guess is what they were thinking about. So I like the fact that I don't have a strong preference. I do like some of the newer alternatives, but I don't have a strong preference. I think I would really like to see a little vegetation in front, because there's such a narrow strip between the house and the walkway. But I think some of the DRB members had talked about, well, actually having something that goes, or maybe you had talked about having something that goes closer to the house, and gives people an opportunity to see the house closer up. I also know that there is a certain reluctance among all of us to changing things that we've gotten used to. So I'm sure that that's a factor in this, but I do think that area could be a lot better. I just am not the right person to advise about how to improve it. I think that you're talking to the people who are in the best position to help get us a solution there that would meet with the approval of the planners and the Historical Society and us. I would be inclined to maybe take a smaller step, start with the thing that is less of an issue, and because, you don't want to have the thing fail because of the one issue, and I think you want to go forward with a positive, with a win. I think it would be better, and then it also gives more time for people, all the people who are weighing in on options there, to weigh in. And I'm confident that there will be some sort of consensus, and maybe it's already in among these alternatives, but allowing a little more time. I don't know, how does that undermine what your schedule is, your timeline? You have this detailed thing, which I need a magnifying glass for. It's very nice to have it in 8.5 by 11, but it makes it really almost unreadable, so.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
So at the last Selectmen's meeting, we were kind of looking for some guidance because GPI needs to pull their 25% plan submission together. So I think at that time, the hope was to work with the Acton Historical Society, come up with some of the additional plans, meet with them, and gather some feedback from them on which design plans they felt more comfortable, at least moving forward with. I don't know, have you guys submitted. Any comment on that at this point?
Doug, you have to talk on your mic, the mic. You have to go to the microphone and talk, because you want to have your moment of fame on TV, so, and everybody
sure
wants
if I
to
did.
hear your illustrious words, so.
Okay, well, I wasn't planning on making a presentation tonight, so I hope my fellow members will jump in, but
As a note, this is Doug Herrick,
I'm
and you
sorry.
live on,
I live on 40 Brook Street.
and he's a
And,
member of the Historical Society Board and the Acton Historical Commission.
Thank you, Katie.
Main Street Master Planning Commission, and we get him to do a lot of things these days, so.
So our position at this point is that we're not really in a position to choose one of these options. We do very much appreciate all the work that's gone into it. There's definitely been a lot of historical sensitivity to this issue, and we very much appreciate that. However, I think given the advice that we received from the Acton Historical Commission and their reaching out to the Massachusetts Historical Commission, we really feel that that process needs to be worked through before we can really, I mean, in a sense, it's a chicken and egg situation that I feel the result of that effort and the adverse effect findings really has to drive this and not just jump into, choosing door A, B, or C at this point. So that's really our position. If Amber or Bill would like to jump in. 100%. Yeah, but we feel like you that we can get to a win-win. We want a solution. It's just that we don't want to run roughshod over the process and end up doing irreparable damage to, I think, a historic resource that we all very much value, because, you rip that amount of front yard off and it's not going back. So.
Katie, you have something?
Yeah, Doug, or Amber, or Bill, or anybody else, knowing they're not speaking on behalf of the Historical Society or Historical Commission as a whole, I guess the main question, though, is going into special town meeting, would you oppose giving the Board of Selectmen this authority related to takings, understanding that the 106 process is still a part of this, and that any, takings would require, approval of funding at future town meetings or things like that, because I think that's the big question, right? So I think that was sort of the concern Peter and Jen and I were bringing up, is if there's going to be opposition to that, voting yes on that approval, authorizing or giving the Board of Selectmen that authorization, then we'd probably want to wait until we're further into the process to be able to work and hopefully come to a win-win for everybody. But if you're not opposed to just giving that authorization, then we can do that formality so that they can move forward with all of them as Kristen originally proposed, and then, continue in understanding that the 106 and other processes still are in effect. It's not saying this approves, this taking at 300 Main Street.
Right. I guess I'm not really clear on really what the acquisition agreement, would result in. I mean, I understand that it's got to be funded before you can actually execute on that right, but if that's the case, what exactly are we voting on?
Sure, it gives us the authorization, and Kristen, you can correct me, but it gives us it gives the Board of Selectmen the authorization to move forward with those acquisitions, and as she said, it means we can accept them by gift. So if people are willing to donate their easement to us, then we can accept that. We can, come to an agreement about payment pending approval of funding, or we could take it by eminent domain. So I think that might be the outstanding question, is that there is that option that the Board of Selectmen, if we did have that authorization, could then move forward with, if we felt warranted in doing that, move forward with an eminent domain taking, but that doesn't override the Section 106 process at all. So that's still in place, even with eminent domain, but I don't think that that's the will of the board necessarily. It's a little bit of a vote of trust, though, so that's why I think you would have to figure out if you're comfortable with it or not.
I think we'd like to understand a little better as a group and discuss, but if it's a fairly straightforward that doesn't preclude or move us down the road to certain assumptions about
Right.
takings, I don't necessarily think we're going to have an issue with that if it permits the process to move forward. It's just that we don't want to prejudge and end up, having certain decisions imposed on us by virtue of momentum around a process that we're not quite sure we understand.
Yeah, so I would say then my recommendation is for the planning department and the consultants to meet again with the Historical Society to talk specifically about what that warrant article means and to get a sense about whether or not they would oppose it. And if they don't oppose it, then I think let's move forward with the whole package for special town meeting. And if they do, then why not just move forward with community lane for now while we have time to try to figure out and get to non-opposition for that. Does that make sense? Because I think there's just confusion about what this warrant article would allow and what it means. And so I think it's worthwhile to sit down with the Historical Society to kind of talk through that.
So we'd be happy to do that. We did talk about that a little bit, I think, at the last meeting. We'd be happy to do that again. But essentially, that article is talking about giving the authorization to the selectmen for the right-of-way acquisitions as a whole. So I just want to make sure it's clear, too, that the 25% design plans that are submitted, that's what's being reviewed by the Mass Historical Commission and the Mass DOT Cultural Resource Unit. So they need plans to review in order to make that determination. So they're not making a determination based solely on the property alone. They're making it based on a plan that's being submitted. So that's why we're looking for guidance on an alternative to send, so that they're basing their comments off of something that is at least closest to what we think the community wants. So with the right-of-way acquisitions, we won't know exactly what the extent will be until the final right-of-way plans.
So then if you want guidance on that, I would say move forward for 25% design with alternative 2 that removes the entire buffer, because that's at least better. I think there's complete opposition to the original proposal, that's, the 10-foot taking, and at this point, I think it makes sense to move forward with the least amount of taking, which is alternative 2, and whether it ends up being with the boardwalk or the the alternative 3 or 4, that I feel like can be worked out later, but really it's a decision between 2 and 1, I guess, or that original one. And I would say go with alternative 2 to bring forward for 25% design, and then try to move forward with a discussion with the Historical Commission so we understand whether or not there's opposition to the warrant article in December or not. That would be my recommendation.
Can I ask a question? I was going to ask Mr. Herrick, because he said he didn't understand, I think, the whole taking easement issue, and I was just wondering what it was that he didn't understand, because it was very general.
So, I guess my concern was that if we somehow acquiesce to a particular, and number 2, I agree, is probably the least destructive, but if we were to say, okay, put that forward as a, an option, a John Doe type option. Does that mean that if for some reason the funding wasn't approved down the road, that the town would still have a right to take that piece of land within some other context, within some other form of funding? In other words, I'm not sure, other than just putting just putting across an option so that the various folks reviewing the 25% can at least look at the entire thing. Other than that, what does this do? And if it doesn't really do anything in terms of any potential risk to having that land taken, why do it at all? I guess what you're saying is you need the right to engage and do discovery and to do valuation and to kind of get a certain level of detail for budgeting and planning.
That vote is a requirement of federal highway in order to get to the point where we can get construction funds. We can't get construction funds unless we have that vote. It's part of the right-of-way compliance process.
So
I think, and I think that maybe, I don't know, God, these things are awful. I don't know if it's possible. I mean, earlier today during our executive session, they weren't working at all. And now they're working very well. But, I mean, what maybe one of the concerns you have is what the language of the easement, the easement agreement would be, or the taking would be. It just is it limited to this particular project, or is it sort of for all time? I mean, I think that I would assume that if this doesn't go anywhere, that, all bets are off and you're back to where you were before all of this discussion occurred, but.
Yes, that it's basically very similar to the Aspen River Rail Trail and Brewsterman Rail Trail acquisition article that the Selectmen got approval from town meeting for. It's for the specific project. So if this project doesn't move forward, that vote is really unnecessary. It's null and void. It's for this specific project.
And then I think that the importance of actually deciding on a configuration is because, as Kristen said, the 25% review by the Mass Historical can't happen unless there's a plan. And so, they're not going to do a review in a vacuum of the property with nothing proposed. They need something to refer to besides just the property itself. So there has to be a plan for them to review. Otherwise, there's no 25% review. That's my kind of very basic, rudimentary, maybe completely inaccurate understanding, but anyhow. Yeah, Peter.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand what you're really asking. I mean, alternative 2 is the least amount that the town could authorize us to take and have a viable project.
Exactly. So
There's 3 feet.
and I should have mentioned that more
There's 3 feet
clearly.
of taking, and this actual warrant article has meets and bounds in it, and I'm sure that actually set out the limits of the taking.
The warrant article won't have the specific meets and bounds of every single taking that will be brought forward to special town meeting this fall, but any of the acquisitions that will be done will have the specific meets and bounds. This authorization will be structured very similar to the ARRT.
Yeah, I'm not
and
sure I was on
BFRT.
the board when that happened.
So it's based on the project, so the acquisition's required for the project. Because essentially the way that the project process works, and it can be frustrating because the approval for certain processes happen so late in the game that you are struggling to basically finish the acquisition process before you have to go out to bid. And so in this particular case, the right-of-way changes almost up until the project's completely designed, up like to the 100%, because construction easements change, they may shift slightly, and all of those have to be acquired through the same process. So that's why it's not specifically delineated in that vote.
So are you asking us to assuming we do go to the December town meeting for a decision on whether you need authorization for the original layout, for alternative 1 or alternative 2, or what?
No, so those are really 2 separate topics. So the acquisition vote is a vote that we need for the project. What we're asking for guidance in terms of which design to move forward with is purely just which design do you want us to move into the 25% review process with. That doesn't mean that it's not going to change or can't change based on historic reviews, additional comments received by the Historical Society, from CHIPO, or any of the other historical agencies. So it's really just what does the town want to put forward right now as their best guess of how we want to move forward, because basically this is what we're looking to proceed with, but it doesn't mean it can't change after that based on reviews, because we may get some reviews from Historical Society or Mass Cultural Resource Unit that we didn't anticipate, and we need to modify the plans in some way. So this is really just...
So it's not even the warrant article, it's really just the designers presenting to the state what our concept is, at 25%.
Yeah, and then that will be presented at the design public hearing to the public, for the public to have additional feedback on those design plans. And they may change again because of feedback from the public, if Mass DOT and the community feels like that's something that should happen. So this is really just taking the next step, and how would you feel like, what do you feel like is the most appropriate way to do that?
I think there are the two questions, right? There's that, and then there's you guys have to figure out what strategically and what makes the most sense for going forward to special town meeting with, in terms of what that acquisition approval warrant article looks like, whether it's just community lane or whether it's all of it. But those are two separate questions, so we need to tell them, go with the 3 feet or go with the 5 or 10 foot, design for 25%. And then I was just offering my opinion on how I think they should move forward to get to a decision for what to do about town meeting.
Any other comments? I don't know, do we have, oh, yes, in the audience, you're still talking, okay, good. Bill,
We were trying to see if we could get to a yes here.
okay.
And you don't have to tonight, especially on the
Yeah.
town meeting one, you don't have to tonight at all. This is just for the 25% design of what do we put forward that they offer their comments on and that you offer your comments on.
If it's truly that,
Yeah,
and we're
that's-
not presuming anything, and we're not
Right.
putting a degree of risk, then we'd say, sure, go with alternative 2 so we can at least move forward with the process.
Right.
But I think it's a little disconcerting knowing that what we've done is we've essentially written something of a blank check, and it could either get greater or less, because just as the 106 process might scale it back if they found there was ledge and it could do harm to the masonry if you were to remove it, there might be a decision that moved it forward so that you ended up 6 feet away from the house. So I think there's a degree of concern about what this opens up in terms of certain unknowns.
I don't think the 25% design necessarily opens you up to certain unknowns. I hear what you're saying, but
No,
it's
the
not.
acquisition.
Right, so that's late, and I'm sorry, because I shouldn't have, I think I confused
No,
this too much.
No, you
But
always
they,
help.
but they are two separate ones of, we're not talking for the acquisitions that we're saying it's, as Kristen said, there wouldn't be any specific meets and bounds at all related to the amount for the acquisitions in the town meeting approval. So really, it's just for the entire project, but,
No,
so.
but what you're saying is you want our, at least acquiescence to one of the alternatives so that you can move forward and then start that, acquisition vote process. And to us, that feels,
So they're separate. The moving forward with one of these alternatives would be for going to 25% design to get the comments and all of that. And then separately, the town meeting vote would be about acquisitions, but it's not directly related to what you say, which alternative you're
so
kind
our
of more.
approval for the 25% is not a prerequisite for the acquisition process.
Right, but the 25% kind of needs to happen first, because they need to submit the 25% design like now, or November, I guess, something like that now.
And just to be clear, we could just submit it with,
Right.
the original plan that the community, that has the concept that's kind of throughout the rest of Kelly's Corner. But we felt that the feedback that we were receiving really warranted more serious, a serious look at it, and to take into consideration the concerns of the Historical Society, so that we could really minimize the effects as much as possible ahead of time, so that we're presenting a plan that is, at least basically addressing those concerns and not just going with something that didn't get to that point. So this plan is really the absolute minimum requirements for federal highway for sidewalk widths. So this is, like Peter said, to that point, we kind of took a look at all different options. And so that's why, we'd rather go with something that is more thoughtful, I think.
So that's what we're saying is put forward, we're not saying, like Kristen said, they could go forward with that original one, but we're saying we think that that's bad. So why not go forward with the one that we're more comfortable with? And that doesn't mean it's going to be ultimately what is the 100% design, because in between 25 and 100, we've got to have the public hearing and comments from the Historical Society and Historical Commission and Mass Historical Commission, and then the 75. So that might get changed then a little bit to 75% design, and then there's the official 106 process, And if that's when, Mass Historical comes back and says, there's an adverse effect and you've got to fix all these things, and they have to do that before getting to 100%. But it's not, it's not the end at all, but it's sort of the starting point of we're willing to do sort of the bare minimum. And so let's put that forward and see what everybody's reaction in terms of, MassDOT and Mass Historical and Historical Society, what your comments on this version are, and then go from there. Rather than, let's start with that original design and get your comments on it, because nobody really likes that anymore. That makes sense.
And that's fine. The only thing that we had discussed, and this is why you sense the hesitancy, is that there was a proposal that we had submitted that says, why even run it by the front of the Hosmer House? You're just ending it, about another 60 feet down the road, and all of the complete streets, the bike path, everything stops. It's a dead end at this point. Now, I know Roland had talked about a future extension, but at this point, we were trying to understand the real benefit to the town and to this project of pushing it by the Hosmer House for only about another 60, 70, I don't have the exact measurement, feet, where it stops right there at the intersections of the Route 2 on and off ramps. So, these assumptions about even the need for it, we're hoping could be processed through the normal procedures of 106 and everything else. So in theory, you could submit it, just stopping before you get to the Hosmer House, and we wouldn't even have to deal with this issue. Possibly out of scope.
So this is a complete streets project. The town of Acton has adopted a complete streets policy, but because this is being constructed with federal funds and it's a Mass DOT project, complete streets are required.
Right, but you have ended that complete streets format at different points in the intersection of the Kelly Corner project, right? It goes to a certain point. It doesn't go to the border of Boxborough.
Yeah, in this particular project location, maybe is this further out? No, they're about the same. So the project ends out here, right at like the interchange, and it continues all along this side. The entire street is being redone here. So it's a part of the entire project.
No, I understand, and I guess maybe this is, as I say, out of scope for this discussion, but there's a bigger picture question as to why it ends right after the Hosmer House. Why couldn't it end before? What is the benefit to the town, to the biking community, of pushing the complete streets model beyond the Hosmer House? I understand the need, if you're going to do it, to have that complete set of three elements. It was just a question we've never received an answer to. Was there an assessment that said this is really important, there's some real benefit to this, versus the cost of what happens to the Hosmer House?
So this project was based on a 4-year community process with public meetings, outreach, and everything. And that's how the plans got to this point. The project extend on Mass Ave and Main Street, the landscape islands in the middle for the approaches for each entrance into Kelly's Corner. So that would have to be a bigger community conversation. This has been the design plan all along. It's really not up to us to make that decision. But that's how the plans have been presented to the Boston MPO to get construction funding, and presented to the community at the last public town meeting for the design funds. So that would be a bigger community discussion, I think, beyond tonight.
And I think submitting a 25% design doesn't preclude you from making that comment during the public hearing and during the process of when the Historical Commission is asked to respond. So maybe that's the Historical Commission's response. So this doesn't preclude that. It's just sort of saying, what do we think we want for 25% design? And what we're saying, or at least what I'm saying, is this version, alternative 2. And then, you comment on that. And then there's that separate question then of, the go into town meeting that I think we've got to figure out later. Or you guys probably should talk to each other before, October when we set the warrant. so we know what the warrant article is going to be. But I don't think putting forth a 25% design precludes those comments at all, and you should still make them. But it's just sort of, what do we say as the board and as the town? What's our preferred design if we go forward with what this project has been all along, and it's, you know, this alternative too.
Can I just add something? This is personal, because I went to the 9/11 thing, and so I parked my car at Not Your Average Joe's parking lot, and I walked the sidewalk, and I have to say that it's a miserable experience to walk along there, because you have to cross the street in order to walk on the sidewalk, and of course there's no side. It would have been very much, a little bit more pleasant, because I ended up having to go across the bridge anyhow, on that side, but I obviously had to cross over because there's no sidewalk on your side. So I can say from a pedestrian perspective that there's a lot of room for improvement for people in that area. It's very congested. I don't see that changing. If we could go back to the time when, you know, it was a much quieter, probably area of town, maybe it'd be feasible. But I can see the importance, at least, of the sidewalk. You know, the bike paths are a little more challenging, you know, but certainly at least the sidewalk, which is why I like that, at least the minimalist approach. In case you're wondering, what good is it? The sidewalk, I think, would be useful.
I'm sorry, you know there is a sidewalk there on both sides.
But right in front of your building?
Yes.
It's not a very good one, I don't think. Is it?
There is a sidewalk.
I don't know. I just found that I was crossing back. I was crossing back and forth. I don't remember where the sidewalk was and wasn't, but I did actually, coming back, I took some pictures of the Hosmer House. And yeah, my navigational skills, I don't remember where I walked. I just remembered it was a miserable experience, and I took pictures of the Hosmer House, and I could see just how much, you know, was like this much frontage and all that. But yeah, and then I also saw where the Acton Medical Society, the medical building, has their driveway kind of right there, and it's kind of messy. But I think that's what I think the infrastructure improvements are supposed to be tackling, among other things. So anyhow. I think it would be nice to have the Hosmer House be more incorporated into, you know, sort of part of the rest of the community there without being just like the rest of the community. I think it just does sit there by itself, and I have a feeling there are many people who don't even notice it. Maybe it's the landscaping that would help a lot, and maybe trees that actually look as if they're healthy.
I just want to say we did follow up on the design review board's recommendation. We've reached out to Dale Landscape Architects, and we will work with them and engage them to see if we can address the issues that I think we all agree with you on.
Thank you. I don't know if we're reaching any kind of consensus. It sounds as if maybe an inclination to go with Plan 2 for purposes of moving forward with the 25%, but with the understanding that could change. And also, this is only for this project, and if this project for some reason doesn't move forward or changes substantially, then everything else does change too. Do you need, is enough?
Thank you very much. That's
okay.
very helpful.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for sticking with this, and to the Historical Society people for continuing to talk. You're probably going to understand the project a lot better than we do, so thank you. All right. We have Selectmen's business. Minuteman Building update, Pam Norse and Mike Majors. Sorry you had to wait so long. It hasn't been that long an evening, though, amazingly, considering what's been on the agenda.
Hi, thank you for giving us the opportunity to give the board an update on where we are with
I'm going to
Minuteman.
introduce you. Pam Norse is Acton's representative on the Minuteman School Committee, and Mike Majors is a member of the Finance Committee, and he is on the building committee for Minuteman. So
I have just a couple of brief comments that I want to make about Minuteman. before turning it over to Mike, who has a presentation about the building project and the current status. So, starting July 1st, the district membership changed to the 10-member towns. The school committee reorganized itself, elected new leadership, with the chair being the representative from Lexington, David Horton, vice chair Sue Scheffler from Arlington, and I will be serving as secretary for the coming year. At our September meeting, the school committee reviewed our goals for the coming year, which I want to share with you so you'll know what our priorities are and what we'll be focusing on. So what we talked about in terms of our goals are to be supporting the Minuteman superintendent, and first of all, implementing the education program plan, including the academy model, and what just very briefly, the new school will include 16 career and technical education programs that will be organized into 2 academies. One is life sciences and services, and the other one is engineering, construction, and trades. And both will be integrated with academic curriculum and shared services. Secondly, to be supporting the superintendent in efforts to be increasing enrollment for the school. We will be getting our official enrollment numbers at our October meeting, so I don't have them with me to share with you tonight, but those will be coming out shortly, and we'll be making sure that we will share them with you and where we stand as soon as we have them. Third is to be working with the superintendent in supporting efforts in recruiting new member towns to the district. The third is ensuring that the new school building is ready for occupancy by September 2019. And lastly, to be working with the superintendent and engaging in decision-making about repurposing the present campus. And the goal at this point is to be demolishing the current building by June of 2020. And then working on how to be moving forward with that. So it's been a very positive start to the school year. There has been a lot of activity on the building project front. Before turning it over to Mike, who I think has some good pictures and slides on that, I did want to just let folks know that at our meeting this month, the school committee approved the sale of $36 million in general obligation bonds. We were very happy to receive 8 bids, and the lowest bid was submitted by the Bank of America with an interest rate of about 3.12%. So we're in module 7 right now of the building project, which is the construction phase. And I will let Mike kind of show you, where we are with that and some of the progress and challenges that we've been having.
Good word. I don't know how we get the, this is the Acton Board of Selectmen. Yeah, this is the building update. As you know, as Pam indicated, the new Minuteman High School is designed for 628 students. And they will be spending their career at one of 2 career academies, a Life Science and Service Academy, as Pam said, and the Engineering, Construction, and Trades Academy. The new school will include 16 career and technical educational programs, including 2 new ones, Advanced Manufacturing and Multimedia Engineering. That's a technical theater. The Massachusetts School Building Authority, MSBA, is investing more than $44 million in this project. Gilbane Building Company is the construction manager. Castle Bowles is the architect. Scanza is the Minuteman project manager. Next one. Construction status. This is a photo as of this past Friday. The first corner of the northwest section of the foundation has been, the concrete has been installed. Yeah, so Friday was a pretty exciting day. All the tree work on the site has been completed, and the site work is almost done. The only thing that remains is the southernmost section of the property, which has little or no rock ledge, so that you clean up pretty quickly. The permitting status, although this shows the two things are related, they're just separate. The foundation and the steel permits have been received from the town of Lincoln, and you'll see that asterisk. I'll comment on that in a moment. In the town of Lexington, their conservation commission has issued a permit to take down the existing building and do site work on the Lexington side of the property. The reason I put that asterisk there is that this is where, it's some concern for us, is the town of Lincoln, their building department took 2.5 months for us to receive the foundation permit and the steel permit, and it should only take 30 days. The permitting issues for the town of Lincoln. The Minuteman District, which is the 10 member towns, we have had to hire a consultant to work with the town of Lincoln, to advise them and educate them on the project, because I guess their building department is just not prepared for a project of this magnitude. Lincoln bases its permit fees on a schedule formula for residential housing. What we paid to date to Lincoln just for these permits is over $250,000. The consultant cost to date is $27,000 and $27,340, and then a peer review service of another $15,000. Lincoln has agreed to give us a phased permit. They did that in June. The first phase is the foundation and the steel permits, because by phased permit it means we're designing the building as we go along, site first, and then foundation, and then steel, and so on. Some things happen sequentially, some things happen in parallel. Now, the second phase should be a full building permit, and we'll apply for that in November, once we have about 90% design. But the problem there is the Lincoln Building Department, again, has asked a consultant to do a full building permit review, which is not unexpected, but the timing is just wrong. The building department has also requested an additional consultant fee of $8,500 to complete further reviews for the full building permit. The issue with this full building permit review, the MSBA, and the way you build schools today is you have construction drawings, and at certain phases, they're milestones, 60% design, 80%, 90%, and 100% process. Usually at the 90% process is when you get your full building permit. A full building permit really should be based on 100% of the plans, because they really can't know what's going on until the building is really designed, and that will answer all your questions. Since the town of Lincoln requested this full building permit review before the building is even completely designed, the consultant, in order to, I guess, justify his fee, came back with 170 questions, which means that the architect has to stop what he's doing, working on the 90% plans, to answer these questions to address these issues. Some of the questions couldn't be answered because the building is not designed yet. The response to many of the questions were that it'll be addressed, as that phase of the project the design is complete. The point is that it's costing all the district towns time and money, and this part is not reimbursed by the MSBA. The building committee, therefore, the building committee and the school committee has directed the superintendent, Ed Buquillin, to explore the process of seeking relief from permitting and other fees related to the construction of the new school. As we just feel that dealing with the town of Lincoln Building Department is getting out of hand, is becoming problematic. Now, in summary, the construction and design ownership team is working hard to get back on schedule. We are estimating that the delays caused by the town of Lincoln cost us about 3 or 4 weeks. But since it's still early in the game, we think we can pick that up. We'll be value engineering the entire project this week with the draft of the 90% design drawings. We have full confidence, based on the professional, positive attitude of the team, that we will overcome the Lincoln setback and get the job done within budget and on time. And as Pam said, we anticipate the new building will open in the fall of 2019, a full 12 months earlier than predicted. And if you want to get more details, you can visit the minuteman.org site to keep up to date with our progress. And this link on the bottom that you could see an animation of how the building will be coming together, how the site develops, and ultimately how the existing building will come down and become whatever it's going to become. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. And my questions, comments from the board? Katie?
Sure, thank you, Pam and Mike, for coming tonight. Very timely discussion on building fees, as we're having a conversation in just a little bit with our building director, about our building department fee recommendations. But I do want to say I'm a little disappointed in the delays from Lincoln and what just seemed like potentially unnecessary roadblocks. But my one question was, is the $250,000 in fees and permitting so far only for that phase one that you've paid so far? Is that just to get the permits for the steel and?
Turn on your mic, Mike.
Excuse me. We have budgeted up to $1 million for the permit process.
Okay.
So there will be more fees coming down the road as the building progresses. But for example, we paid $13,000 to the Conservation Commission. The town of Lincoln, the Conservation Commission in, that was Conservation Commission in Lexington, the Conservation Commission in Lincoln, and the Planning Board in Lincoln, the Building Department in Lincoln. So far, we've already spent $300,000 to them. So it's and some of that is we had to hire a consultant to work for them that we're paying for. So the fees have been $225,000 to date, and almost $90,000 in consulting fees related to that.
So are those fees sort of what you anticipated, and the unanticipated costs are really first of all, the time delays as well as the consultant fees? As
Shelby would testify, there's a fee schedule on, you know how much the building costs, that will determine the fee you pay. Where the extras and the delays are coming in is that they weren't prepared to review these plans, so we had to provide them with a consultant to review the plans, and that's already $90,000 just for extras for the consultant. And the consultant, in order to justify his $90,000, had to ask questions and just to make sure that make it look like he's doing something. I think we're maybe enough it depends on how educated we have made the building department in the town of Lincoln. I think some of the foundation work and steel work is fairly straightforward, not really complex, structural questions. I don't know if there's environmental issues or whatever comes down the line, but we have a budget of about $1 million for permits. We think that's outrageous to begin with, but that's what they have planned on spending. But as I said, we've requested the superintendent to see if he can do something about that, because we just think some of these delays and fees are unreasonable. Because if it costs us time, it's costing us money.
Right.
And the goodwill, we did value engineering early in the game and took 1 year off of a 3-year process, and which could save significant money, and some of that could be lost by just bureaucratic delays.
Sure. Well, thank you for the update. I will say that, like I said, disappointing about Lincoln's delays. I know they don't have a high school in their town, but I'm sure they've built schools in their town before, so it's not the first, school building they've ever had to, permit or see. But that is how some towns unfortunately are. So thank you for coming in and giving us the update, and we look forward to seeing the continued process. There might be other questions, Mike, so don't run off yet.
And Lincoln was one of the members that withdrew. Anyhow, yeah, they have grammar schools in Lincoln. They share a high school with Sudbury, which is in Sudbury. So, any other comments, questions for the board? Mr. Manager.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out to the board that the debt for Minuteman will be kicking in for us in FY, I think 19, at about $250,000 for I think 10 years, so $2.5 million. It's an agenda item at ALG this coming Thursday to talk about how, moving forward, we're going to finance that. We're going to keep it in the operational budget, or we're going to look at a debt exclusion and things like that. So that'll be a part of Thursday morning's discussion.
And anybody else have questions, comments? I just wanted to, I think it was, thank you, Mike, for that, but I wanted to acknowledge, I recall that Pam, you're now chairman of some committee that's responsible for recruiting members or enrollment, increasing enrollment. Is that what it is? Yeah. Well, I think I still believe that when the new building is done, I think it's probably going to speak for itself. So that's my hope. Any questions or comments from the audience? Anybody? Great. Well, thank you. We'll have to do this more regularly. It's been a while since we've had an update, so it's good. Thank you very much, both of you, and sorry you ended up being so late. This is the hazard of our meetings. So sidewalk fund discussion. Peter, are you coordinating this, or? Maybe not. I am. Somebody is, yeah.
Okay, I hope to make this as short as possible. I think there's a lot of information we hope to get out about the process for building sidewalks in town and the funding for that. There are a number of questions that have come up from the sidewalk committee, and I don't think we're going to make any decisions on those tonight, but we need to start the conversation and have a process for making some decisions later on down the road. Let me just say that sidewalks, in my view, are, first of all, public safety issues in town, making sure that people can walk around town in a safe manner. They are public health issues, what better exercise is there for than walking around town? and they're a positive environmental improvement to the town. They get people out of their cars, and walking instead of driving has positive benefits in terms of air pollution, less air pollution in town. So, 10 years ago, we created a sidewalk fund. Prior to that, it was pretty much the squeaky wheel gets the sidewalk, and the committee has done a lot of work over those 10 years to put together criteria for ranking streets in town and trying to prioritize where sidewalks should be. The town engineer is here. He can talk about how they get built. Essentially, I had like 5 issues that we should talk about tonight: the amount of funds in the sidewalk fund and the process for constructing sidewalks, the process the sidewalk committee uses for prioritizing sidewalks, the amount that we charge the developers who do not build sidewalks but contribute to the fund, how that sidewalk fund money is being used, and finally the future of the committee. There's a lot of information, backup material in the package. Steve Barrett in the Finance Department put together an analysis of the spending over the last 3 years from the sidewalk fund. There's a little over 116 grand in the unrestricted fund. Gift funds from developers who have been required to contribute to the fund either by the planning board or our board as part of site plan review process. And I think there's another 190,000 in dedicated funds. For instance, the Concord Muse project contributed money to the town specifically to build sidewalks on High Street in anticipation that there'd be more traffic from that project on the Concord line. So, but the town has not had to use operating funds over the past many years because there's been enough revenue in those funds to build sidewalks. But as we move forward, it may be necessary to build into the town operating budget some funds to help pay to build these sidewalks. So there is in this, in the backup documents again, the committee's ranking of sidewalks and the criteria they use to rank sidewalks. And some of the comments from citizens who have come to the committee. The committee gets impassioned pleas from residents talking about safety issues for their kids to get to school and other dangers of not having sidewalks. So the committee has come up with this ranking of the list. Part of the information is that they looked at that list. It's 10 years old. The streets have changed. They're looking at updating their criteria for ranking streets. They reordered some of the top 10 criteria. Based in part on some subjective opinions about how streets had changed and what might become more of a priority, and not the straight calculation based on the criteria they have for ranking sidewalks. And they need to continue to look at their criteria and update their rating system so that it reflects the current status of sidewalks in town and roads in town rather than an old model. So with that opening, once the sidewalk committee puts together their list of priorities, it's up to the town engineer to try to work to get the sidewalks built. And let me turn it over to Corey York to just let people know about why it is so difficult to build sidewalks in town and what some of the obstacles that the engineering department has to encounter in order to get the projects moving forward.
Good evening. Yeah, as he was mentioning, once the sidewalk committee puts together their priority list, we start working on the different designs going through. So what we'll do is initially we try to get a survey of the streets so we know what's out there. We try to work on a conceptual design and see where we need easements, which for the most part we typically need easements in almost all locations. And then we start going door to door to each house, speaking with the homeowners, working out the logistics in the sort of the front yard of trees, slopes, landscaping, things like that, retaining walls. We try to come to a sort of an agreement on both sides of sort of what makes the most sense, and come to terms as far as what easement we might need, and work into the legalities of that. In some instances, it's a pretty drastic change, so it takes a little bit to get over that hump of what people can kind of visualize what their front yards are going to be like. We've been fortunate in building them that the highway crews have built some stone walls along Taylor and Minot and different places that people can start to see that end product, so they can feel a little more comfortable about when they see their wall disappear, sort of what the end product will look like. So there's a lot of those issues we try to work through that are aesthetics, that are design issues. We get into structural designs. We need to talk to a structural engineer about retaining walls and go into the building permit process for some of those. We get through environmental issues, but a lot of times it's the biggest issue is just going through the easement process, trying to acquire easements, trying to work through all those issues, and then get to that final step where both sides are sort of comfortable with what we have for a plan moving forward. A lot of times that's the sort of the longest step in the process that we need. We try to work on multiple locations at any one time, so that if we're getting more responses in a certain project, we kind of focus on that, because ultimately our goal is to get projects designed and permitted and ready to go, so we can try to get projects moving. Currently, right now, the crew has been working on High Street, the upper section, sort of between Audubon down to Valley. They were moving along. We unfortunately had to take that crew off to help with the drainage project on North Main Street, so they've had to stop for the last few weeks while they were helping to get Main Street back open. They're doing some loose ends right now, and they'll be back out there to finish up that this fall. So there's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff that just, unfortunately, people don't see, but it is a time-consuming process that we get to. And then we try to, as best we can, get the priorities going in order, but it really boils down to what projects we can get permitted and ready to go and get all the easements in place. So a lot of those factors just kind of dictate where we how we approach each one and how we get them going as far as construction. So.
Okay, I apologize. Corey is a certified professional engineer, but he used to be the town engineer, but his title now is DPW director, so I'm sorry about that. Slash town engineer, okay.
I'm actually a land surveyor, just so.
Can you just talk a little, I think maybe we ought to have, if you have questions, we ought to just take each topic as we go along, but just talk a little bit about how you decide whether to use town crews or outside contractors, and what the cost implications of that are, and that kind of stuff.
A lot of goes with project to project. I find personally, in say in the case of like High Street, there's a lot of difficulties in building with walls, different things like that, especially when you start digging the slopes, you don't know what's there. It's much easier for us to be building the more difficult projects in-house. We will carve out sections of something sort of beyond our scope. It's sort of down in the valley of High Street. We had to replace the drain system and build a retaining wall in that area. It's a little beyond our scope, so we outsourced that piece of it. But a lot of the excavation of the slopes and the smaller walls, things like that, the rebuilding, we can do a lot of that in-house. We can do it with our staff, so it's much cheaper. We're not paying prevailing wage or the market rate of if we can get a contractor that's interested to do the work. I know when we did Great Road, sort of between Harris Street up to Nonset, we put that out to bid. We had very little interest in the contractual world. The market was coming back for contractors, and this was too small of a project for them to want to come. That project, other than having vertical granite curb and a little bit of drainage work, it was pretty straightforward. There were no slope issues, nothing in the way. That came in a little over $120 a foot to build that. We tried to do the next section via contract. That was the last section down by Nonset, across from Nagog Pond. It was a shorter section with a little bit more drainage work there, but there was just no interest. The market was busy, and the contract came in at $350 a foot. So we just ended up rejecting that. It was just a little outlandish. So we rejected that and did that in-house, but we try to do some of the easier stuff with contractual work, because they can kind of focus on it, get it done. It's a little bit cheaper. When you start getting into the real difficult sections, it gets very costly very quickly. So, and we're able, with the crew, as we are working in front of someone's house, if something unforeseen comes up, or the neighbor starts to realize the impacts of what's happening and they want some kind of an adjustment, it's much easier for us to change a little bit on the fly to make those amenities happen, versus sometimes when you have a contract put out and you start changing something, you start getting the change orders and cost increases, and it adds up pretty quick. So we've generally done that route where, like I said, where the more difficult project, we try to do that in-house, and the easier ones we try to put out. So we use that, but it kind of fluctuates by the jobs, by the availability of crews, things like that, so.
Okay, thank you. I think that's a big improvement over when we first started the sidewalk committee 10 years ago. We weren't doing anything in-house, and we were trying to get the capability to do that. Corey tells me we now have a skilled mason on the crew that builds those stone walls, and so there's been a lot that's happened over the last 10 years. There's been a lot of success in building sidewalks in town compared to what was happening before that. But any questions on this?
I have a question. I'm just wondering, is the purpose of this agenda item to bring people up to date on what the sidewalk construction process is, or are there some asks that you have? Are there issues that you've confronted with regard to sidewalk construction that you would like the town or the Board of Selectmen to be aware of, or the sidewalk committee has concerns? Because I know that one of the issues that you had brought up at prior meetings was the issue of our site plan permitting process, where we typically, if there's no need for a sidewalk on the frontage of a project, we request a money donation, and it's usually prevailing wage, and we've gotten some pushback about that. And then there was concern that, sometimes now we want bike racks and there's no fund for that. And the fact is, we're not using sidewalk fund money to fund bike racks. I know that was a concern of yours. It's something that we probably need to talk about in a separate meeting on a different agenda item about site plans, and if there are other things that maybe we want to consider setting of a fund for. But I didn't know if there was something in particular. I know that we got a lot of material from the sidewalk committee, but I didn't know if there were particular issues or things that the board could be helpful with in that regard. So
yeah, I think the decisions that the board has to make is the amount of the contributions to the sidewalk fund. I wouldn't expect that we could have a discussion tonight. That's probably a longer discussion, and that's come up in a couple of site plans we've heard recently, and we can talk about those issues. What the sidewalk fund is used for, because we have had some recommendations from the planning department to use the funds for things that I don't think are authorized by the zoning act or the zoning bylaw, and the future of the committee, which I think we can decide tonight probably. I can tell you what that is, and we can decide how to move forward with the sidewalk committee itself. So those are the three areas that I think we need to make decisions on.
And on the issue of the future of the committee, I think we all saw the proposal to merge it with the TAC, the Transportation Advisory Committee. Yeah, I definitely, I'm sure that there are other people in the committee, the board, who have opinions. I certainly have an opinion about that. I don't like that idea, but anyhow. So.
That may have been simplified a little bit. Cameron Cousins, who is now the chair, I guess, of the sidewalk committee, sent me a later email that said they now have another applicant who's going through the VCC. He's a mobility impaired citizen, which is great, I think, to have on the committee. He may not be able to make all meetings. Right now they have 7 slots. They're down to 3, so they couldn't, until this person gets approved and appointed, they couldn't hold a meeting. She's suggesting we just go from 7 to 5, and I would suggest that's a good solution for the temporary thing. We can look at whether they should merge or not over the longer run, but we could approve that quickly, and at least the 3 of them, who are very dedicated and meet regularly, could hold meetings. So,
reducing the size committee we've done that before for committees that are having difficulty making quorum. And especially if it's an advisory committee, it's very easy to do. All right, well, I'll let you continue with it, whatever your
No, I just
plan was,
wanted to
yeah.
make, there's a lot of questions that keep coming to me. I just had an email today from a person who lives on High Street. What's happening? The sidewalk was being built. All of a sudden, it's not being built. So I wanted to get Corey information out as widely as we could about what the problems are with building sidewalks. High Street is going to start again and hopefully be done by the winter. So I just wanted to make sure that we could get that information out to people, so.
Maybe we could put it on the website, have a little section on the website about sidewalk projects. People can check it. I think most people are pretty adept at checking. It might be helpful.
Sure, and Corey does send out to the sidewalk committee periodically a whole status, I think every month when they meet, the status of all the construction work that's going on in town. So, and I've tried to forward that to the committee, to the board at times. But yeah, we could.
But it might be, if there are that many inquiries about what's going on with the sidewalk projects in town, it might be something worth covering on the website to save all of you questions and repeating answers. So, but anyhow, Katie.
Yep, so I'll make a motion in a second to reduce the committee to 5 members. I think that makes sense, and I think, as Jan said, we should schedule in the future to talk about those other issues. I think there is a lot more information we should get, in particular when thinking through how to determine what developer contributions should be, and I can send you some thoughts on that. And then I would just say, once we have a committee that can now have a quorum to meet, that they should consider having a public hearing, maybe just to update people on what is the sidewalk process, and do an update that way, because I find you get more information out, and then they might even recruit members that way as well, because people are suddenly, interested in it or learn a bit more about it, in addition to putting things on the website. I'm sure they had things back in the day, when they first started, but it's good to do it every, so often, because people move in and out of town. But I will make a motion to update the charge for the sidewalk committee to go from 7 full members to 5 full members.
Second.
Okay, Katie moves, and Joan and Peter second. Any further comments or discussion on the board? Okay, do you have a comment? Danny, would you like to come up and share it before we vote?
I don't have a comment on the vote, so if you'd rather go ahead, but I would like to ask permission to ask a question to Corey in regard to something that we've discussed.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah.
I mean, we can, the vote, well, I'll remember that we have to vote.
Sure. Danny Factor, 11 Davis Road. So I'm here in 2 capacities. One, the address may sound irrelevant because the board may be aware, surely the sidewalk committee members are aware that the stretch of Great Road between Davis and Main Streets has actually been the #1 priority on the sidewalk list for many years now. The other capacity that I come to you is I've been authorized as a member of the Commission on Disabilities to speak on behalf of the Commission in regard to people with disabilities who've had concerns about navigating on what is a very narrow shoulder between Davis Road and Main Street on Great Road for a number of residents who, most of who live in apartments, who often have no choice if they want to get to CVS to pick up their medication, for example, to navigate on that road. We had at the last sidewalk committee members one member who is mobility impaired that uses a cane. There was a letter from another member who had had a fall on that stretch of road, as well. And I state this more as an example of, some of the safety, hazards that I'm sure people are concerned about at town. My specific question for Corey, and first of all, I want to thank you for all the work that you've done, is that I understand on this particular stretch of road, which has been the #1 priority for a while, I know we've been hampered because of issues having to do with the rail trail and the repair of a bridge as well, but my understanding was that at the last sidewalk committee meeting, the word through the chair, through you, was that the project is actually shovel-ready, and that the only thing that is in the way has to do with getting permission or authorization from DOT. And I'm wondering if you could report a little more on what exactly the impediment is, and more in general, to make this a general issue, is whatever discussions have to take place between your department and Mass DOT, is this something that you could use assistance from, either from the general public or from the Board of Selectmen or anyone else? Thank you.
Currently, right now in that section, we do have a design, and we had a wetland permit on it. The bigger issue was the rail trail came through right when we were finishing up the permitting. As their contractor was coming in with other equipment to work on Great Road, we couldn't get in their way while they were doing it. They had contracts out, they were working. They're sort of, I don't want to say they're on the tail end, but they've made some pretty good progress recently. I know they've, especially on Great Road, just a lot of the areas they were using for equipment access up the side, they've been homing and seeding that. Their contractor has been giving me updates on other locations. I haven't really gotten a firm update on that, but it looks like a lot of their work along Great Road is winding down. So what we'll need to do next is kind of go back and relook at exactly what they built, because when we designed ours, it was based on their proposed plans. Now we have to make sure that they built close to it. We don't have any other obstacles that we may have to readdress based on what's actually constructed. And then we'll be going through the final Mass DOT process with them. They haven't, when we initially started the bridge work, we had approached Mass DOT about crossing their existing bridge with the sidewalk, but they wouldn't allow it, so we had to go on a separate structure to be built. And they worked along with us structural guys as the design, so there's nothing new as far as what we worked with them. So I don't suspect there should be any major obstacles moving forward. It's just sort of procedural with them. But yeah, the biggest drawback has been just trying to coordinate with the rail trail, and I've reached out to them on this one in particular just to sort of gauge it, but it looks like a lot of their work is winding down on Great Road. They're more or less working overhead, so we're hoping that will be the case, and we'll be coordinating that as one of our next projects coming in the next season.
Thank you, and just a couple of comments in response that are only meant to be helpful. First of all, if Corey and/or the Board of Selectmen has not seen, I don't know if it was included in your packet tonight, the 2 letters from the residents of 9 Davis Road that were submitted to the Sidewalk Committee at their last meeting. I'm sure they can provide that with you, but please be aware of the urgency of residents. I mean, the way that they speak about it is that it's just a terrible accident waiting to happen. Given that this re-examination, I understand that things have changed since these 2 projects that took place on the stretch, and that there needs to be a re-examination done of the shoulder before building can begin. My 2 questions is, do you think that this re-examination can take place this fall before the winter sets in? And second, I was under the impression, at least from the Sidewalk Committee, that there's still further authorization from DOT needed. Is that not the case?
That is correct, yeah. We've worked with them in the design, but we still have to do the final permit with them. So we'll be doing that sort of as we do the final checks of what they built and coordination. Hopefully that will be occurring over the winter months.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, we have a motion and second to reduce the Sidewalk Committee from 7 to 5. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, abstaining. Is there anything else? I think probably the other issues that you brought up, the other 2 things we need to put on a future agenda, because they're not like the scale, the amount of money we use, the prevailing wage, and the question is that always necessary? That might take a little more thought and maybe more information. And then the
Right.
issue of other options besides sidewalk fund contributions, so.
Right, and, you know, as you know, we've had some recommendations from the town staff to take waivers of sidewalk and donations to the fund and put them in a recreation account. I don't think the zoning act, or zoning bylaw allows that, so we've talked, it does allow money for bicycle amenities in town, so whether we establish a new gift fund that includes sidewalks and bicycles or separate gift fund for bicycles. We don't have a gift fund now for bicycles, but I think the zoning bylaw does allow it, so we might want to consider whether that be a good use of those funds.
So is there anything else that we need to discuss tonight about sidewalks or sidewalk committee?
I don't think so.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much, Kurt. You're free to go home. Yahoo. And thank you for all your work on that. I mean, it's terrific that so much of the more difficult work can be done in-house, even though that, I don't know if you need more staffing. We don't want to talk about that, FTEs and all that. That's another headache, but thank you very much. Fee recommendations, building department. Frank.
For those who don't know me, Frank Ramsbottom, I'm the building commissioner. This fee recommendation is strictly looking at a few of the fees that go into the building revolving fund. They pay the electrical inspector, plumbing inspector, and pay for the archiving of our documents. The last time we adjusted these fees was in 2006. At the time, it was actually established by the previous building commissioner. They put in a set rate per inspection, minimum fee of the inspector would get a minimum of $30 for one inspection, $60 for two inspections. And it worked out fairly well. Since that time, you know, costs have increased, and the range of jobs has changed. You still have little small jobs, but particularly on residential, you also see some much larger homes, much larger renovations that the fee structure doesn't quite, it's hard to say, oh, we're going to set one minimum fee for everything and keep it fair for both the people paying for the inspections or the inspectors doing the work. And so, you know, I did some research. I also looked at what some of the other towns do. A lot of them have gone to a percent-based rate, which is similar to what we do for our building permit fees, to pay the electrical inspectors. And so that's what we've come to for this one. There'll still be a minimum fee. It would pay the inspector $40 per inspection. And then beyond that, there'd be a 2.5% charge, of which the town would keep $20 for administrative costs and the balance paid to the inspector. Similarly, on the plumbing fees, rather than go to a percent fee, we went to a fixture charge. It's a little easier to do. The work, so if you have a house with one bathroom that has, you know, 3 fixtures and a kitchen, so you have 2, maybe a laundry, there would be 6 fixtures altogether. There's a fee for that, or if you have a much larger house with 5 bathrooms, then the fee incrementally goes up to sort of cover the work involved. And then the archiving charge, the fee was $3 a page. It's gone up to $4 a page. We want to collect $5 a page to cover some of our administrative costs in addition to what we pay the archiving company. And that's also would be the same as what the health department did last spring. So I think I covered it.
Okay, questions, comments from the board? Peter?
Yeah, I just have one quick question. You mentioned in your memo that you want to reserve the discretion for the building commissioner and land use director to review and reduce a fee when deemed appropriate. Are you asking us to authorize that to?
Well, that was a question, yeah. So it's, even with all the current fee we have, when you get a large commercial job, it was set as a percentage rate. And the electrical fees are, they tend to be all over. The cost of the work, it tends to be all over the place. And it's just tough to nail something down.
I understand why you would ask it. I just, then my only follow-up question is, did the Board of Selectmen, in the past, did we approve that? You're asking?
No, you've never done anything like that.
You've done that, that's part of your regular course? Have you never done that, or you don't do it now, and you're looking for it?
We don't do it now.
Okay.
But it's,
Okay.
the question has come up before, and
Okay.
it doesn't matter. If you want to reserve that right yourself, that's fine. I was just...
No, I'm happy to give it to you.
Peter, is that it? Or, yeah, okay. Katie, go ahead.
First of all, thank you, Frank. Reading through this, it was very, very thought through, and I appreciated the memo that you gave to us. And my only question was, I was just intrigued why sort of the minimums for commercial work are less than for residential homes and things. Is that just that they tend to not, I would have thought they'd be more complicated for things, but I don't do anything related to electrical wiring or plumbing, so I trust you. I was just out of pure curiosity.
So the minimum fee, the new home, that's a minimum fee for a new home.
Oh, okay.
Versus commercial work, that meant just like a simple alteration.
Not a new build, not a new
building, no.
building. Okay, because I was like, that's got to be much more complicated. So there's not a minimum fee for a new commercial building? Is that just because it would?
Yeah, that's just automatically going to flow into the.
Sure.
Yeah.
the two and a half. Okay, yeah. Excellent. I thought it was very good. So thank you very much for putting this together.
Joan, Ching Sung, anything? All right, yeah, I would say that, when you were talking about charging for fixtures, I thought, boy, I know what fixtures are, toilet, sink, but, I thought, well, in the kitchen, how many fixtures, how would I know what a fixture is? I'd have to define it, and then that's probably why you want to leave it to professionals who actually know what constitutes a fixture and what isn't. So I'm going to defer to your judgment about how you're setting these rates and in what fashion, and with Peter on the issue of if there are occasions when you have complex projects, commercial ones, where you want to confer about, maybe having a big fee that just covers everything, that's in your discretion. We certainly don't want it. I know people would love to give it to us, but no, we don't want it. Thank you. Thanks very much for all that effort. So, no further comments, questions from the board. I'll open up to audience. Barry.
Hi. Barry Rosen. One of the things that I understand the corporation things, and they usually put things out for bid, and they're working with large figures. But what my concern is the percent fee for residences based on the expense. And the reason I'm concerned about that is I think it has a number of negative consequences, and I've already seen some of the negative consequences in the town with neighbors. For example, right now, if you replace your windows and you go to more efficient windows, you're actually penalized. If you get better insulated windows, you're going to pay more than a person who just replaces the glass or puts in very cheap windows. Labor's about the same, although these companies charge you different amounts. But the difference, for example, to replace the windows in a house such as mine is $10,000 to $12,000. If I just do it with the El Cheapos, it's $4,000. And you can legally get away with it. If I just replace the glass, I can probably reduce it even more. So you're saying for a person who chooses better materials and is saving energy, we're going to charge them more. In the same aspect, what we're doing with electrical, and I actually used the inspector that does some of the inspectors. I don't have the same inspector. In Boxborough, who is an electrician, did some work on my house. Needed more work, so I called in another electrician, 40% less. Same work. Why would I pay more money on equivalent work? The inspection is going to be the same. It was the same. So I have a problem with that. So you're saying you buy better materials. Instead of aluminum, I use copper, many times the expense. Or I have a different labor rate because I found an electrician that does it for less. I pay different fees. Makes very little sense to me. And it actually discourages behaviors that the town is trying to encourage. We're trying to encourage using better materials, energy efficiency, less dangerous materials, and I'm penalized if I use those because they're generally more expensive. Windows were a huge difference in glass. It depends what company you use. And they both could pass an inspection. As long as they both pass inspection, we're encouraging doing less good things. And we're striving to get the town as energy efficient. All our policies are leaning that way. So I see unintended consequences of charging a percent of the labor, in which there are large differences. I found 40% difference. And I know personally, replacing glass was a monster difference. You want to choose better stuff, but we're discouraging our homeowners from doing what we think are smart things. So I think we need to reconsider how we do that with the residences. End of speech.
Thank you, Barry.
Just to clarify, would windows be something, I thought this was for electrical, plumbing, and gas.
It is, yeah, he's just using as an example of a different.
Okay, but just your windows wouldn't be a part, so in terms of the energy efficiency. Right, well, okay. I think it's a simpler way for the town to deal with it, and I think anyways, I appreciate your comments.
Maybe simple isn't always the right answer. We found that.
Barry, if you're going to make further comments and you want to share them with the public audience on TV, go ahead and say it at the mic. No, I understand Barry's point. I don't know, Frank, if you have any kind of response to what he said. I know you said that other towns are going to this percent-based charge, and I don't know if you had any sense of why they're doing it, other than that maybe it is easier. How to sort of. Thank you, Barry.
Well, I mean, to Katie's point, it's to, keep it simple, to try. I mean, I know it's, to Barry's point, it's not perfectly fair, but you try and be as fair as you can with the process. It's, when you set fees, we don't get to send a bill afterwards. We don't, keep a time track of the work that's done. It's basically an estimate that we charge for. It's a system everybody uses. I'm not saying that's the best, but so.
Well, we can always try it, and if you're inundated with complaints about it, then, come back to talk to us about it, and we'll have another discussion. But yeah, this is really definitely certainly not my bailiwick. And if we were having work, and now maybe next year we're expecting to have some work done in our house, so maybe I'll find out what it's all about in person, and you'll hear from me, but thanks.
Yep.
Anybody else?
I was just going to make a motion to approve the fees as recommended in the memo from the building commissioner.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Second.
Katie moves and Joan seconds. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, abstaining. And now finally, Kelly's Corner infrastructure plans.
In 2020.
Oh, Acton, oh gee, that's a wrong, Acton 2020 plan update process. I kind of conflate them. It's just Kelly's Corner, Acton 20, yeah. Thanks, Frank. Good night. The last one, all these town staff people, we're ruining your evenings.
It's all right. I don't have much of a social life these days anyway. Just kidding. Just kidding. So I'm here representing the Acton 2020 committee. Andy Brockway was here earlier in the evening, but once he saw how things were going, he asked me to speak in his stead. So we noticed when the 2020 committee last met, August 9th, we discussed one of the board's recent long-term goals, which was to update the comprehensive plan. So 2020, I believe, was adopted around 2012. And it was after a very long process. This is obviously way before my time, seeing as I've been here for about a year and a half, going on 2 years. And from what I understand, tens of thousands of dollars in consulting time was used to develop that plan, hundreds of hours of meetings and input and feedback went into developing that plan. And we're about 5 years into that plan. So rather than going through a whole let's re-envision Acton process again, because it seems like we're always doing those sorts of things anyway, the committee thought that what might be a good thing to do for a plan update is to concentrate on 5 or so key areas and to use the committee as a way to have forums and just open up discussions about these 5 key areas, see what the plan says, see where people are going, see where they think the town should be in the next 5 or 10 years, and host a number, say 2, 3, 5, whatever it takes on each of these 5 subjects, and basically turn that into an addendum to the Acton 2020 plan, rather than coming up with a Acton 2040 plan and going through hundreds of hours of outreach and tens of thousands of dollars consulting fees to develop a brand new comprehensive plan. So the 5 areas that the committee envisions reaching out to various public and various committees that are tasked with with things around these issues are housing, transportation, infrastructure, social and community issues, and sustainability. Now I understand the board has recently delved into a sustainability policy, so we see sustainability kind of winding its way through all of these issues. The first issue that the committee would like to start having forums about is housing. Seems to come up quite a bit, the whole idea of Chapter 40B. I know the plan makes no assertion that the town should make strides to get to its 10%, and the plan called for guiding growth towards the village centers. In my short time here, I've heard a lot of people saying maybe we should be striving to get to our 10%. Maybe we should do one large final rental project and be done with 40B. There's been a lot of issues with historical homes being demolished to make way for new 40Bs. I'd like to open up that whole issue, that whole idea, and have people talk about it and try to come up with ways to foresee which properties might be more vulnerable, and to maybe more proactively do historic preservation rather than be reactive with our demo, demolition, and delay, which is basically the only tool we seem to use in our toolbox these days. So that's essentially what the committee is thinking about doing before we do anything. We thought it would be wise to come before the board and get your input, feedback, and ultimate blessing on this process.
Thanks, LB. I actually was interested to read the first line that it was pursuant to the Selectmen's long-term goal, and I thought, I know I didn't vote for that because I feel as if we just finished the 2020 plan, you know, the exhaustive implementation. So anyhow, questions, comments from the board. Katie?
Thank you, Sylvie, and to 2020 for putting this together. I think doing a more focused update makes a lot of sense. I think my one question was, it says that you would hold public forums on all of these, but then it says inviting the stakeholders. Is that meaning you would have meetings with just those stakeholders, or would you do meetings with those stakeholders and then also public forums, broader public forums?
I think primarily we'd like to get people from these committees that are listed below in the same room to talk, because they are the people who are actively engaged in all of these issues. Of course, every meeting that 2020 holds is a public meeting.
Sure.
So we would obviously invite the public and any other stakeholders. And this list is not exhaustive. This is not a definitive list, but these are the ideas.
Okay, yeah, so I think it would make sense, perhaps having initial meetings where you focus it on these stakeholders, understanding your meetings are public and other people can attend as well, but then also maybe having, once you're getting to a point where you have a draft or something of what this update might look like, having maybe a couple targeted public forums where you're trying to get more of the broader public involved as well, because I think part of the feedback we hear sometimes when people say, when we say, well, this is what 2020 is advised, and they say, well, I don't, I wasn't a part of that, and I was like, well, you could have been, and so wanted to just make sure they could have been, and were encouraged to be a part of this. And then I saw the Board of Selectmen was on one of these, and I'm sure, you can't keep us away anyways, but I would say put us on all of these, and maybe we even have, specific board members that are sort of focused on each of these or something like that, that could kind of shepherd you along or offer guidance on each of these topic areas. And then since you mentioned sort of the historical aspect, I would make sure to include Acton Historical Commission in the housing one as well, just because, as you noted, that has been an issue. But otherwise, I think it makes sense to go forward with this kind of targeted update.
Okay, thanks for that.
Anybody else on the board? No? Peter, Shing-Sung, Joe?
No, seeing the list of sidewalks going back to 2008, I'm glad we're updating the 2020.
Yeah, I mean, as a person who didn't really want to revisit the master plan just yet, I like the idea of a much more focused, an addendum, as you say. And Katie's already talked about the public outreach segment. I do like the idea of bringing together people who are really focused initially on these topics for perhaps a more informed and deeper kind of perspective on each of them, and then seeking more broadly, seeking input from the public, because, the original process is just everybody shows up, and eventually you whittle it down to a bunch of topics, and by the time I got involved, I remember the last time I thought, who picked these? I thought some of these topics need to be condensed into like fewer topics, but it was too late. Things like that. But I think it was just whoever showed up for some of the very early meetings, and so I think that it would be a little more coherent if you have people who are actually specializing or especially focused on certain areas to kind of help to, and that'll get complaints. Well, we weren't involved, but I think that you end up with somewhat better kind of targets for effort. So anyhow, but thank you for this, and I do like the idea. So
great, thank you.
All right, board is tired. So audience, questions, comments?
I'll be brief. Danny Factor, 11 Davis Road. First of all, I'm very happy that the first form that Acton 2020 is interested in delving in has to do with housing, because I think more and more people in town think that this is really a crisis that needs to be addressed. I know there was a lot of talk in your statement about 40B. I want to point out two other potential stakeholders that sometimes get missed. As you know, there's a minimum income that exists to qualify for 40B. It's somewhere in the range of earning $40,000 to $50,000 a year. If you're earning less than that, you're not going to be eligible for 40B. You're likely going to be put on a wait list at the Acton Housing Authority. And I can tell you, as a member of the Commission on Disabilities, we had representatives from the Housing Authority meet with us at last meeting, and that wait list has never been longer, and it's really a crisis in town as far as the need for public necessity housing, and the stakeholders, including the Acton Housing Authority, and just individuals on that waiting list are stakeholders that need to be considered. And in particular, we need to have a mechanism to create that housing, because the Acton Housing Authority is doing a wonderful job managing a lot of the existing housing, but they don't have the resources to create that housing, and it's something that needs to be discussed, because we're starting to have reports of homelessness in town as well, which any number of stakeholders would be happy to educate Acton 2020 about more. The other population that I want to mention has to do with people with disabilities. Once you create a townhouse with a duplex, it is very unlikely that it's going to have any accessible vertical access, and there's a lot more need to create apartments, hopefully on land that is already existing, so we're not eating up any more green space, but there's a lot of need to create accessible housing. And some of the problems, even when you create a two-story apartment building, is that it's not necessarily required to have an elevator. It's only when you have that third story that you can attend to the needs often of people with disabilities. And I'll mention also that as much as we very much need to tend to the needs of the senior community as well, I'll give you an example of a building that is the ACHC is working very hard on Massachusetts Avenue, where the funding is available for senior housing, which is wonderful, but I can tell you as a member of the Commission on Disabilities, we have a lot of people who fall through the cracks. They are under 60 years old, they have disabilities, and there's not nearly as much funding to create housing for people in this category. So let's just not forget about these categories of people, such as very low-income people and people with disabilities, and I hope they're included very much as stakeholders when we talk about housing as a town. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Danny. Anybody else? Any comments, questions from the audience? Comments from the board? Do you want us to vote to kind of endorse your proposed, the committee's proposed approach?
Yes, please.
Okay. Do we have a motion?
I'll move to approve the proposed approach for the comprehensive plan update process per the memo from the Acton 2020 Implementation Committee.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Katie moves and Joan seconds. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
And you're free to go home too, and so are we, I
Motion
think.
to adjourn.
So moved.
No, I moved it. You have to
Who moved?
second it.
Oh, everybody said, okay. Katie moves, and anybody seconding?
I'll second.
Okay, James second. Boy, people are really slowing. Okay, any further discussion? No. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Thank you. Good night.